Okay, I think we're set.
Okay, good evening, everyone. This is Lori Charlton. It's March 22nd, 2022, and I want to welcome everyone to the Board of Finance budget hearing. I'll call the meeting to order and ask that we please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, to the members of the public, this is the fourth budget hearing for the fiscal 22-23 budget. Each hearing has been devoted to different departments or topics, and tonight our focus will be on those areas of the budget that cover public safety, namely our police and fire departments. In addition, we'll cover the town's IT budget, we'll cover debt service, which is the town's obligations related to both long and short-term debt, and we'll have a discussion on fund balance. After tonight, we have just one more meeting in this format, that's this Thursday, to cover the remaining departments. This coming Saturday, March 26th, we have our public budget hearing, which will be devoted to hearing residents speak on any aspect of the budget that they wish to address or on the budget overall. That Saturday hearing will take place in person at Fairfield Ludlow High School at 9:30 a.m. Following that public hearing, this board will meet again on Monday of next week for final deliberations and any follow-up questions for the departments. And then on Thursday of next week, March 31st, we will vote on a recommended budget to send to the RTM. I hope to see a good turnout at the public hearing on Saturday. For those residents who can't make it, you're encouraged, as always, to send your comments to the following email, bof@fairfieldct.org. If you do so, please include your name and address in your email as you would with live public testimony. We also welcome public comment during tonight's hearing. If you'd like to make a statement that's relevant to any of the items under discussion on tonight's agenda, please indicate so in the chat box. And to the extent we have anyone who takes us up on that opportunity, you'll be recognized to speak at the times indicated on the agenda. And we'd ask that you limit your comments to approximately 2 minutes. With that, I will move to item 3, discussion on the budget. The first item listed on the agenda is response to emails, and this space is reserved for addressing any emails or written testimony related to previous meetings that we received since we last met. We did have some residents submit written testimony advocating for the library and social services budgets that were put forth by the first selectwoman, and for the restoration of the education budget that was approved by the Board of Education. I want to thank those residents for their input and their advocacy. All right, with that, we are going to move on to public safety, and we're going to start with the police budget, Department 4030, which begins on page 144 of the budget book. I'd like to welcome Chief Bob Calmaris and Deputy Chief Keith Broderick. Thank you both and your entire department for everything you do to serve our community and keep our residents safe. Thank you for being here tonight. If you could provide a brief overview of your budget, focusing on any significant changes, new initiatives, or any matters that you believe are important for the board to understand, that would be terrific. So I will turn it over to you.
Madam Chairwoman?
Yes.
The chief texted me. He's having some technical difficulties.
Okay.
I see him on. I asked him to call Dave to see if Dave could walk him through.
Okay. If he, all right, let's just wait a minute and hopefully he can get through.
It looks like he did.
There he is.
Yes, I did. My apologies. Sorry
No
about that.
worries. Well, you missed our warm welcome to you, Chief. So welcome. Good to have you here with us.
Thank you.
We are all on the page of your budget, and what I had suggested before you came on is if you'd like to just provide a brief overview of, changes from last year, new initiatives, anything else you think is important for the board to know. We'll go through that and then we'll jump into Q&A. So the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Our 2023 budget request represents a 0.48% reduction over FY22. The primary drivers for this reduced budget include reductions in our capital line, reductions in our maintenance and repair of automotive, in addition to other factors. The line item for crossing guards was removed from our budget to be transferred to the Board of Education budget. And the request for 9 replacement vehicles that were in our capital line were also removed to be purchased out of the outside job fund. This reduced the capital outlay by over $569,000. One of the most significant proposals, which was an increase to our salary line, was the increase of our staffing by 2 members, sworn officers to the police department, going from 108 officers to 110 officers. Just for some context on that, as demands for specialized services have increased, we have remained progressive and accommodated those demands without increasing our total numbers of sworn officers for over 20 years. This has had a compounding effect with respect to officer burnout, and we are seeking these 2 additional officers to reduce this effect. Additional increases to the budget include a notably higher cost for motor vehicle fuel and an increase in clothing and dry goods to complete the transition to our new uniforms and patch changeover. On the revenue side, police department anticipates total revenue of $245,356. This represents a 1.92% increase, and that consists of pistol permits, new LPR parking program, which was instituted last year, funeral escorts, false alarm responses, etc. And just to close out, modern policing demands a proactive commitment and participation in the community that extends well beyond traditional policing. We have done our best to present a reasonable budget that represents the resources necessary to accomplish this. With that, I will open up to any questions from the board.
All right. Thanks, Chief. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay, so I see Mr. Testani's hands up. Mr. Testani?
Yes. Thanks, Madam Chair. Hey, Chief. Good evening. How are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you as always. And first of all, I want to thank you and everyone in the department for all their hard work, all their dedication. I'm guessing hopefully you got a chance to see it, but there was a really great article today or within the last couple of days in the Fairfield Citizen about the Fairfield Police Department and other police departments within Connecticut, mentioning that there was a pretty significant donation of body armor and helmets to Ukraine. So want to congratulate you and the department on that initiative. It looked like there were a couple people instrumental within the department to make sure that happened. So I know it was, from reading the article, it looked like it was tremendously well received, and I'm sure we could all be grateful for what the Fairfield Police did, as well as the other departments that were mentioned in the article today. Hopefully, it didn't look like I saw you in particular comment on that, but if you wanted to, the only question I had on it, I'm guessing these were ones that we had already used or newer, or I just curious, like how it was divided out between the departments.
Yeah, so ultimately, in every police department across the state, the standard of life for a ballistic vest is about 5 years. That doesn't necessarily mean that the vest is obsolete. If you still wore the vest, it would work. Most police departments, through their collective bargaining contracts, they are obligated to purchase every 5 years to keep up with industry standards. And officers tend to have these vests that usually get discarded or incinerated over time through the police department. Some officers just store them in their lockers. Ultimately, you end up having a few extra vests laying around, which we either use to test at the range or what have you. In this case, we were able to collect those vests that were expired from officers who had them laying around, and we were able to make the donation to the Ukraine.
Yeah, and that was great, really great, and it was a great article. So, congratulations again on that. The only question I have on the budget is the line item, and you sort of alluded to it. I was just curious, 56130. It was a close to 19% increase in the cleaning and janitorial supplies. Was it a supply chain issue? I just wondered why. You already explained on the clothing and the dry goods. I was just curious about that piece of it.
Yeah, so cleaning and janitorial supplies, FY21, it was basically on the 3-year average. FY21, we had 10,005. FY20, we had almost 8,000. And then the 22 was 67. So it was a 3-year average over those 3
I got you.
years.
Okay. Makes sense. Well, it's hard to argue with a 0.48% decrease in your budget. So thank you for coming across with that. And as always, very supportive of your budget, and certainly the addition of 2 new police officers. Frankly, I was shocked when I read the comparison to other municipalities in a similar size to Fairfield's with the amount of sworn officers per resident. And I think it's long overdue. I was happy to see that you're adding 2 new officers, and it's only to make the community more secure. So I applaud your efforts in that. And as always, I'll be supporting you and your budget. So thank you so much for coming tonight. Again, it was good to see you. Thank you,
Thank
Chief.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Testani. Mr. Mottola.
Thank you, Chief. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Thanks. Good to see you.
Likewise.
I have a few questions about the budget. I guess the first one, I'm not sure if you can answer it. Maybe Jared has to answer it. So your budget is down this year, and I think you mentioned it, that one of the reasons is the capital outlay is reduced by like 94%, and that's because the town are they purchasing vehicles using an outside job fund? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So where maybe this isn't you, Chief, where do we find the outside job fund? Where's that located, Jared? If someone could point us in that direction. How much money is in that fund? And is that, and I guess my third question with respect to that's money that the town collects when officers are involved in outside overtime projects that are the road jobs, construction jobs, those types of things, correct?
That is correct.
Chief, do you want, yeah, so the money, this is not an appropriated budget account. So and typically what has happened in the past is that the money comes in from these jobs. So this could be a utility company that's doing work, and they need some kind of safety or traffic control presence there. And so the police do that, and the officers who do that get paid for that time and it comes directly out of the fund, and the fund gets the money from the company. And so over history, it's pretty much been a wash. The amount that has come into it, the same amount has gone out, except over the last 3 or 4 years, it's really started to, the balance in there has started to grow. And, it's gotten to a point where, we should find something to do with that money, something that's public safety related and related to the police department. So what we did in working with Brenda was to come up with a plan for, and I think this has been discussed in the past, was to pay for the replacement police cars. And so, as Chief mentioned, there were 9 that were originally proposed. And so what we're proposing is that we not fund those out of the budget, but they would come from the outside jobs fund. And the most recent balance was somewhere around 1.2, $1.3 million that was in the fund. And
Okay.
so the idea would be, now we're sensitive and don't want to create cliffs in the budget. So the idea would be that we would fund, let's say 9 next year. And then the following year, we would do 7. And then the, year, and reduce it by 2 cars a year. And essentially when we get done, when we get through that and get down to 1 or 0, that the balance that's in there now would be exhausted. However, we project that it's going to continue to accrue balances every year.
Okay, is the accrual based on we just charging more money for these types of jobs? That's what's happened over the last few years?
So it's kind of twofold. We increased it in 2017, the outside job per hour cost. And in addition to that, we've had some pretty big infrastructure changes within the town. So there was a huge gas pipeline put down in the beach area up by Lake Mohegan and up in the northeast corner of town as well, which went on for probably over a year. And then we had the fiber optic job that is still going on to this day all over town.
Okay. And Jared, I'm sorry. So for this year, you're going to purchase how many vehicles out of the fund?
Yeah, so in next year's budget, there will be 9 that would get purchased out of the fund. So the dollar amount, Chief, is somewhere around $550,000, I believe.
Yeah, I think
It's
that's
a little
what-
over 569.
There we go.
And then the following year, you're going to use the same fund to purchase 7 vehicles and, okay.
Right.
So I think, thank you for explaining that. Who has, and I'm not necessarily saying it's us, but who gets to decide how to spend that money? And I guess I'm asking like a legal question. Is that the first select woman's prerogative as the executive head, or is it the police commission? Because does the police commission have some control over that fund because they set the rates? I just want to make sure that, I'm not saying it's a bad idea, don't get me wrong. Has that been looked at yet from a legal standpoint? Does this have to be approved by the Board of Selectmen and then the RTM purchasing this? Does anyone know?
So it's a little bit different for this year because like I said, in the past, the only expenditures out of there had been to pay the officers. And so that's why, out of transparency, we're coming to you guys to let you know what our plans are. But yeah, like I said, that as far as past expenditures, Caitlin may be able to go back much further, and if there were other things, but I know in the recent past, the last 6 or 7 years, the money has gone to pay the officers.
Yeah, we've never done this before in my time, which I'm not saying it's a good idea. I think I just want to make sure that whoever has to say yes to this from an approval standpoint, make sure the I's are dotted, T's are crossed. That's all I'm saying with respect to that. And then I don't know if anybody has any questions about this issue because I wanted to move on to another topic.
Yeah, thank you for that, John. I would like to, if anyone else has any questions on this topic, why don't we fully cover this topic, and then Mr. Mottola will move back to you for any other questions you had on this budget, if that's okay.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, John. Mr. DeWitt, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris DeWitt. Thanks, Chief, for being here. I'm looking in the CAFR, because the CAFR is where the money, this budget is, other governmental funds. I don't want to get into this line by line tonight by any stretch of the imagination. I think it would be good for us to go through and talk about it at another meeting when we have more time, a Board of Finance meeting. And I'll recommend that to go on the record that we do discuss that. My first question about this fund, and maybe Caitlin can answer, is this auditable, or is this other governmental funds audited every year? Well, I guess if it's in the CAFR, it's auditable. It's audited, right? I guess I answered my own question. Good point. And what was the other question? Yeah, the only other question, again, for our meeting coming forward, it looks like charges for services come in and charges for services go out. They're the exact same number. It looks like we're drawing off of what is categorized as investments, which I'm assuming is the longer term, money we've accrued over the years. And if I remember correctly, before we raised the price, we were drawing off that reserve because we weren't actually charging enough. Is that not correct, Caitlin?
Caitlin, you're muted.
Caitlin, we can't hear you.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
You hear an echo?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, so there's 6 funds that kind of draw into the public safety line that you're looking at in the CAFR.
Mm-hmm.
The largest being the outside jobs. There's also a youth service fund. The regional fire school is part of this public safety fund, federal asset forfeiture, a dog fund, and a state asset forfeiture. So the fact that it looks like this year that the charges for services and the expenditures are the same exact dollar amount. I think there was something that went out that broke out every piece of this, the 6 different things that I just itemized, which I don't want to say it's a coincidence, but your expenditures add up to your service revenue, even though there was intergovernmental revenue in the other pieces. The state, the federal, the dog fund, youth service, and the regional fire school all have grants associated with them as well. But a lot of those that I just discussed are pass-through accounts where the revenue that we get in from the state or Fed is expended almost immediately, except for the outside job fund where there could be a lag, because basically the expenditures going on in there are the payroll, like we just alluded to, for all the officers working. And then the revenue that comes in is from the customers, the UI, the gas companies, and everything. So there could be a lag in the timing of when the cash is actually received from them.
Okay, that's helpful. And again, I don't want to belabor this for tonight, so I'll ask the chairman. We'll put this on because I'd like to understand all of the other governmental, because there's about like 8 of them. Some of them are very small, like Shelf. It's just like $30. So But anyway, okay.
Yeah, thank you,
Sorry.
Mr. DeWitt. And just for the benefit of the board, I did have a discussion about this with Mr. Schmidt, and we do plan to devote time during the first regular meeting in April to doing a review of all of these special revenue funds and these other funds, other types of funds that are in the CAFR. To Mr. DeWitt's point, it's important, I think, that we do that periodically. And as to your question about the audit, yes, this fund is included in the audited financial statements. My guess would be that given the size of it and the materiality of it the immateriality of it relative to the general fund, I'm not sure that means, specific transactions were audited. So it is important to have time in our meetings when we review these funds. And I know that other boards of finance in other towns do this. So we will be doing that in April. Mr. Curley, did you have a question?
Thank you.
I did. Question/comment, I suppose. And first off, thank you, Chief, for being here tonight. Appreciate it, and appreciate everything that you do for the town and your department.
Thank you.
With respect to this particular topic, I do agree with Mr. Mottola that this is likely more a legal question in terms of how this money gets funded or used, and making sure that we do this in a legally appropriate way. My guess is, and I'm not a lawyer, but my guess is that the appropriate way to do it from a financial standpoint would be to transfer the funds from the reserve into the general fund and then designated for this particular line item. The reason I say that is because, as Mr. Testani pointed out, it looks like it's about 0.48% down year over year in the budget, but we know that the police department does have this capital outlay and that they will continue to have capital outlays in years to come. And if we don't have the activity rolling through this capital outlay line item, we're going to lose that history. And we're going to have what looks like a financial cliff next year if we didn't, again, use this fund. And I appreciate that Jared mentioned that next year we'll pull money for 7 cars and then 5 and then 3. But my fear is that we lose the history if we don't have it flowing through this line item. So I think it's a twofold point. One is, let's make sure we do this, consult with the lawyers to make sure this is done properly. But secondarily, if there's a way to do this from a financial accounting standpoint so that we see this activity rolling through this account, I think that's the more appropriate approach.
Thank you, Mr. Curley. Yeah, I agree. I had the same thought that this should be grossed up in the budget. Other questions from the board? Mr. Stark.
Is the police department selling used vehicles as it takes on new ones?
We return vehicles back to DPW, which some go out to auction and some go to DPW for to be repurposed.
Oh, okay. Do you the funds from those dispositions, will they go back into this fund that's making the purchases?
When we have, if the cars have used their usefulness, they go to DPW, and whether they, the bottom line is I don't ever see the money from whatever
you never get a credit back. Okay. That's all I wanted to know. Just curious. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stark. Mr. DeWitt, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to address what Mr. Curley was mentioning. I understand what you're saying. You know, the budget book, I like the fact that the budget book says the chief wants $589,000 and the first selectwoman's budget was $20,000. So we see that there's 2 numbers there. I mean, the problem is that request doesn't move forward every year. And that could be problematic, but you know, I do like, at least in the year, to show that there is a difference, that, you know, there's a request for amount of money, and however the funding comes through, you know, it comes through. So at least explained on a yearly basis. But yeah, I do share that concern. If we're going to spend the next 3 years burning down this budget and buying cars, the 3-year average will be, you know, whatever other capital the chief wants could be $20,000, right? So I'm with you, but I think there's a way to keep track of it that we can remember, right?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Thought I saw Ms. LeClaire. But her, Ms. LeClaire, I'm not sure if you're still there. Your screen looks blurry. So I will come back to you. Other questions from the board? Mary, here you are. Okay, go ahead. We can't hear you yet.
Sorry about that. My dog needs to go out or come back in. I had a quick question on the number of police cars that we're buying this year and how many we traditionally buy. I thought the number was 8, but in prior years, I think we may have cut 1 or 2. So I just wanted you to remind us what we normally need in a given year.
Sure, thank you. Last year, we proposed 10, we were cut 5. The year before, we proposed 10, we were cut 5. The year before that, we proposed 10, we received 10, and the year before that, we proposed 10 and we received 10. And I have a graph that will show all the way back to, I think, like 2006, but that's about the last 4 years.
Okay, so the number is usually 10 that we need each year.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then do we have any other sources of cars? I know sometimes, like if there's been an accident, we get a new one or something like that. are we going to be short one car this year, or is there one coming from another source?
There is one coming from another source that we had an opportunity that was ordered last year. We, instead of purchasing 5 cars last year, which we were allotted, we were authorized to buy a 6th car because they had the 6th car in stock and we were having supply chain issues. So with the expectation that we would, very high likelihood, we will at least receive 1 car this year, we went ahead and took the opportunity to grab onto that car that was that we may have issue getting for the future.
Okay.
And we had money in the budget to do that. I guess it's just a timing issue.
It's a timing issue, yes.
It's like, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Leclerc. Mr. Curley, another follow-up on this topic?
Yeah, just while we're staying on the capital outlay line, just a quick question, Chief. In your longer term plan for cars, is there any plan for converting or switching over to or integrating EVs into your fleet?
Yes, so that's a great question. And I've been speaking several times during this year with Mr. Bremer, the Chief Administration Officer, who basically we're going to start a pilot program for 2 electric vehicles. He is looking to purchase those out of the ARPA funding that was put aside for the electric vehicles for the town fleet. And when we are able to get the infrastructure in place, we're going to explore those options.
Great. That's great. Thank you. No further questions on this.
Okay. Mr. Walsh.
Good evening, Chief. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, sir.
Couple of questions. Well, to address Mr. Curley's earlier question, you seem to have no problem whatsoever to recall what the history of your purchase of cars are, right?
That's
So
correct.
that's never going to be lost in the budget process, correct?
Well, when we put together the plan for last year, that was one of the things that we looked back to ensure that we had a history of what we were purchased. Yeah.
So for you and for all your predecessors, no one seemed to have a problem reminding everybody how many cars they purchased this year, last year, the year before, how much we didn't fund, but you asked for. You always kind of know what the number is. It seems to stay at 10. And when it's less than 10, we have no problem recalling how many less than 10 we purchased, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And secondly, I'd like to thank the first select woman for this idea of using this number that in the CAFR, I'll have to take some responsibility, I guess, for not realizing this number had built up to be so much, but to use this outside job fund to purchase the cars, because obviously it's town money, and I think it's properly being used this year. So thank you very much for that. And then I guess I have a question in regards to your body cams. What line is that on? Is that under capital as well, or is that because if it's not, I'll move on. We'll just move on to that at a later point in time.
The body cameras?
Yes. The body cameras and their software and the recording fees, because obviously that was purchased, that's going to be purchased for the next 10 years with ARPA funding, correct?
That's correct.
So what line is that on in your budget?
The body cameras came out of the ARPA funding. So you're asking where that is in our budget?
Yeah, I'm asking where that normally is, because normally we pay for that every single year through the budget. And this is going to be a change now that we're paying with ARPA funding. So where is it normally in the budget?
Give me 1 second. It's going to be under
These professional services, information technology,
IT probably.
IT. That's it, right.
So the last time we purchased the camera system, that was obtained through a grant that was fully funded by the state. And then this next, the Axon body camera and taser program was issued through ARPA, or so we may have some support expenditures related to the body cameras, but we're not going to find any specific. And I'm just looking under my spreadsheet that support sheets budget line under IT software.
Yeah.
And look under
I was just in there.
IT.
Yep. That wasn't there from last year.
Yeah, no, there's nothing in there.
All right, can you guys get back to us? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot right now, but the first select woman had stated in our ARPA funding when we said we were going to pay for this with ARPA money for 10 years.
That's
that
correct.
That was going to save your department that amount of money. And I'm trying to figure out where that's coming from to know that what I'd like to see, I guess, and prove to myself is that your budget's gone down in those areas because now it's going to be paid for ARPA. So really your budgeted number should go down in those specific areas. And I'm trying to figure out what line items that's on.
Understood. So we received the last Panasonic body cameras that were paid for by a state grant. And now these new ones are coming from the ARPA funding. So while we did have, if I'm not mistaken, some support for the body cameras, and it was probably just IT and software. And if I had to guess, that was probably 2 or 3 years ago.
As well. So our cartridges.
Look back at yeah. So that was deleted out of there. Keep the taser.
Right, so that means it was originally in there in prior years, and we deleted it out when we went with the new.
Mr. Walsh, I can get you not only the history but the years where we,
yeah, that's fine. Okay. No problem, Chief. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. So if you just get me that information, I'm just trying to line up the money now that ARPA is paying for versus what was in your budget. So if you can figure that out, or you get that to us, I appreciate that. Thank you.
My pleasure. And if
go ahead.
If I can just add that the first select woman may have been referring to the costs that would be related to the cameras if we didn't go with the program.
Okay. But in previous years, those were paid for with a state grant. We never paid for them personally. The town of Fairfield never had to pay for them.
That is correct.
Okay. Okay.
10 years old.
Okay. I have no other questions, Madam Chairwoman, in regards to capital outlay.
If I could just jump in, Chief, didn't we, during the ARPA, Jim, we talked about saving 75,000 for the tasers because those have to be, Chief, don't those have to be renewed every whatever so often?
We did.
Right. And what I think what we were talking about during ARPA wasn't that this is an annual line item, is that the fact that these dash cams and body cameras were so old and not of good quality, we were going to have to start adding significant amounts into our budget to start replacing them because they were breaking and there was issues with them. So I don't know that they had it, Jim, in their budget every year. There was like they had it for, a while back, and then they started to, they're just starting to fail basically.
Okay.
So
Last
it seemed
year
like
there was
a good deal to get that 10-year deal fully, replacing them if they break. They did all the cloud storage. They were doing numerous things that the former company or product that the town was purchasing, whenever it did purchase it. And Chief, you can speak. I know you've just been the chief this first budget, really. But I don't know that it was necessarily an item that was in every year.
Yeah, last year we had $75,000 in the budget for tasers until the ARPA was approved.
Okay.
Is there any money in the budget for the cloud storage or?
I'm sorry. I want to make sure that we wrap up this discussion on the outside job fund, if that's okay, because we may have some additional questions on capital. And I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Walsh, but I just, does anyone else have questions on the outside?
Later on.
Sure. On the outside jobs fund specifically, I know I have one. Mr. Testani, do you have a question on that topic?
Yeah, just real quick. Thanks, Madam Chair. Hey, Chief, I just curious on with regard to the body cams and the tasers, I know in that presentation, there had been demonstrations of other equipment. So did we use the ARPA funds for anything else in addition to the tasers and the body cams?
No.
I'm referring to, I think they had small,
Virtual.
I want to say planes,
Oh,
airplanes. with
there's a training component. I'm sorry. So the whole package comes together. And to answer Mr. Walsh's question about cloud storage, that's all included in it as well. So it was training, de-escalation training, the tasers, the training cartridges, the virtual reality, and there was also the body cameras and the in-car cameras to go with it as well.
Okay, but none of the drones.
No drones.
Okay, that's what I was curious. Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Again, any questions relating to the use of the outside job fund to purchase the police vehicles? Anyone else? Okay. Chief, I just have a question. So for the outside jobs, the rates that are charged are set by the police commission. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I think I asked this question a couple of years ago, but given that we're now just thinking about the financials that are running through that fund, the question I asked previously was how that rate was calculated and whether it accounted for the fully loaded cost of providing services. So one of the things that came to mind was pension-related costs. When officers earn overtime, does that, for private jobs, does that have an impact on their pension earnings?
It does not.
It does not.
It does
Okay.
not. Their pension is based on their base salary.
Got it. So what's running through that fund represents, so the expenses that are running through that fund represent salary and FICA, and there's nothing else that's sort of in another spot in the general fund that would not be reflected in that public safety fund.
To the best of my knowledge, that is correct.
Okay. And the rates were, when were they last updated? Did you say 2017? I missed that.
I'm going to give that to you 1 second. It was 2017. 2017.
Okay. And do you happen to know if this is something that's reviewed periodically by the police commission?
It is. So it was reviewed last year. We did a Fairfield County review of all the departments in Fairfield County and did a comparison similar to the comparison we did for our staffing levels. That went statewide because we had to find a comparative departments and comparative municipalities. For this, we looked at Fairfield County because the rates in Fairfield County are generally comparable within the departments. And what we found is we were on the lower end, significantly lower. We brought it up to kind of middle of the road. We have yet to put the addition in place. It was approved by the police commission last December.
Okay. All right. That's good to know. So when we're looking at this, we're looking at rates in the area because I'm assuming we have a flat rate and it, you know, if we have a more senior officer versus a more junior officer, the pay disparity between those two officers has nothing to do with what the outside job cost is charged, right? So the profit in the fund, if you will, is going to be, you charge some sort of average rate, or maybe you charge the highest rate, but the profit, if you will, that the fund earns is going to be somewhat dependent on, you know, who's actually doing that work, which officer and what seniority is. Got it. Okay.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. Very helpful. All right. So any other questions on this outside job fund and the use of that to purchase police vehicles? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go back to Mr. Matola, who I think was in the middle of his questions on the budget.
Thank you, and thanks, Chief. Thank you, Jared, for explaining all that, and thanks for everybody for asking all those good questions. So, Chief, you have right now, there's 8 vacancies in the department.
So, what's that? Yeah, I'm gonna give it to the deputy chief.
That's fine.
Yep.
Hey,
How's
Deputy
everybody doing
Chief, how are
tonight?
you?
Good, how are you
Good.
guys?
Good.
We have a lot of vacancies. So we have 3 anticipated this month, which will bring us to 9 total. So we have 6 as of today and 9 as of April 8th. And we have a couple more projected going forward as well. So we have 9 vacancies by April 8th.
So when you want to fill those, obviously, correct?
We do. We currently have 3 people in the academy, so they're accounted for. So on top of the 9 vacancies, we have 3 that aren't road ready as well. FTO takes about 3 months. So when they get out of the academy, they won't be ready till, say, mid-July. We have a lateral transfer. We have 4 conditional offers. They're slated to start in May if they pass everything. And we have 6 conditional offers of new hires that are slated to begin the first week of June if they pass everything. So we have 10 on the hook. Well, we have 5 academy seats, and 1 person is actually delayed until September because they're away with the military in Guantanamo Bay, and they're not released yet. So we're gonna have 9 officers basically ready to go ASAP. It's just about getting them trained and up to work, up to speed.
All right, and out of all those 9, how many are lateral transfers?
We have 4 laterals, 2 from Bridgeport, 1 from Trumbull, 1 from Greenwich. And they need about 200 to 250 hours of training to get up to speed with us. A modified training program for our policies and procedures in town.
Gotcha. Do you do a field training with them too?
We do.
Okay.
So
But they're
some
already
departments
certified.
operate very differently. So they have the law down, but not our policies, procedures, our town, the way we operate, our standard operating procedures, policies.
Do you, just one more question, then I'll yield the floor. For the lateral entries, does the department have discretion concerning what they can pay them? I mean, or do they actually, they don't, or do they start
They come
off
in at entry, they come in entry level per the union contract. So they give up their time in their agency, they give up their any benefits they have for pension. They come to us as a brand new officer.
Okay.
So higher date is where they fall seniority wise.
So an individual who's never been a police officer who is hired and goes through the academy, and one who's a lateral who is hired, who's already certified, they start off at the same pay rate.
Correct.
Okay, that's good. So you should expect to see some savings in salary. Well, you've had vacancies, but they'll start at the entry level salaries. Okay.
They'll start at that 69,000 range.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Chief.
You're welcome. Mr. Sistani?
Ms. Marmion.
Thanks so much. I just want to follow up on Mr. Matola, what he was saying. This is great news that you've got officers coming in. You're going to fill those vacancies. Do you project that that's going to affect your overtime that you're projecting for next year?
It probably will affect overtime for next year, yes. Won't affect this quarter, but most of them will be up and running mid-July to late July. So we anticipate, if we get the 2 new ones in the budget and a couple more retirements and anything that's unforeseen, we'll be down 4, but it's much better than down 9. But yeah, it should help. Definitely help.
So can you project for us, because your overtime, it's not projected as going down? Is that because when you put the budget together for this year that you didn't know that you'd have those officers hired?
We didn't know we'd have a lot of those people leave. We had a duty injury and 5 people kind of leave suddenly. So those weren't projected. But on the flip side of that, we have a lot of vacancies in specialized units. We have our accreditation office that's not filled. We have our temporary detectives not filled. We have our traffic unit down one spot that's going to be down two. So we're going to be able to plug some people back in the specialized units where they are, which we've kind of, we're holding off and putting them on patrol to kind of hold off the overtime and basically just the overworking and burnout of our people. So some of it will, you know, definitely circumvent the overtime, but that's if we can get everybody up and running. I don't want to say people wash out, but sometimes people wash out in the 10th hour, 9th hour. They don't pass something or they go to another agency, because when the academy is getting ready to be held, all other towns are doing the same thing we're doing. And sometimes people are in multiple processes. So sometimes people bail for other towns last minute. So it's a year before they get up and running, the new hires, not the laterals, but the new hires. A year before they get on their own, about nine months to, you know, we won't see them on the road till next, I don't know, next March probably.
Right. And I know specialization was mentioned by the chief, you know, in the overview that you want to, there are areas that the police force wants to be specialized in. So I understand what you're saying. Regardless, is there a way, and I know it's hard, but can you give us any perspective on whether or not you think this number will change, will go downward, if there will be less overtime, just so that we can understand this budget a bit more? Or, I mean, you don't have to do it
Hard to
now.
say.
You don't have to do it now, but maybe if you look at where you might plug those officers and what remains, et cetera, would be helpful.
Yeah, we can get something. I mean, there are going to be assumptions, obviously, because, you know, as you hire new officers, they have less time than senior officers. So that's a benefit to the town, less time to take off. And we're losing a lot of senior people. But the vacancies in all the other positions, and if we, you know, if we have four in the academy starting July, well, the next academy is September. So whoever don't get in June, they have to hold off till September. But we could, I mean, it's gonna be a rough number, but I'm sure we can come up with something for you.
I mean, you could even come out with, you know, a range. Just give us
Sure.
a sense. That would be very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marmion. I just want to follow up on Ms. Marmion's question, if I could. I'm not sure I'm following the answer. I completely appreciate that there are vacancies every year and that overtime is impacted by those vacancies. But when we look at budget to budget, we've budgeted to be fully staffed, right? We haven't budgeted for vacancies. So I guess I'm trying to understand why we're budgeting for 2 new officers on an assumption of full staffing, but overtime is budgeted higher. I mean, we had a bunch of vacancies this year, right? I don't know if 8 is a lot. It sounds like a lot, but why would we budget more overtime when we're also adding additional officers?
I guess the services we provide is still, like I said, our accreditation office is empty. Our detective bureau is down the acting detective. Our traffic unit's down 1 officer. School safety's at 7 right now. We just had a request for another officer in the schools after a pretty big incident at the alternative high school. So we're pulled in a bunch of different directions, and it'll allow us to still offer all the services in many ways that we do. It's not just, I mean, patrol is the meat and potatoes of our division, of our department. There's, you know, 40, supposed to be 40 something. Right now we're down at 37 on patrol. All shifts are short 1. We're starting down 1. But
yeah, and I fully appreciate that, because that happens. You're down officers, so you're incurring overtime on an actual basis. I think I'm still struggling to understand why we would budget to be fully, you know, budget the full staffing, budget 2 new additional officers, and wouldn't that be expected to relieve some level of overtime? Granted, I understand that it takes time to get officers up to speed, and we've got some coming out of the academy, but we're also comparing, I mean, I'm not sure I follow. I guess in general, I would think that, you know, if we're short officers, where the officers are working a lot of overtime, they're getting burned out, et cetera, isn't the answer to reducing that overtime, adding new officers, and yet we've got both lines sort of going in the same direction, both increasing. So I feel like I'm missing something.
Madam Chair, if I can, I think you were on the right track. If I can interject and maybe ask the Assistant Chief to comment. I think in terms of staffing, it takes longer, right? I think you were sort of on the right track as far as, you know, my own experience with different police departments. The 2 new officers won't be up and running, so to speak, for probably, I'm going to say at least 8 months. Would that be a fair guess? The 2 new ones, maybe even closer to a year.
Right,
So,
and I'm sorry, I just want to hear, because I know.
yeah, no, I just,
Isn't
that was
asking
my,
for how the budget was built, and I appreciate that, Mr. Testani, because I think we have that, some level of that every year. So, you know, when I look at, you know, the budget, I believe assumes full staffing. You know, what happens in actual overtime sort of happens. We lose an officer, so overtime goes up, but regular payroll goes down. And I understand that equation. I'm still struggling to understand why we would assume that, you know, on a year-over-year budget comparison, we have a higher level of staffing, and wouldn't that alleviate overtime? I saw Ms. Kupchak wanting to interject, so if please.
So, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And so, what I would say to you is, I would ask the board to refer, and yourself to refer to the slide deck presentation that I gave when I presented the budget. And when Chief Calamar's department came through when we were building the budget, I had been hearing this for years, even before I became the first select woman, that we were understaffed in the police department for a number of years. And the chief can answer to the last time we actually added an officer to our department, in light of the fact that police are now called upon to do way more than they have ever been called upon to do. And so when, if you look at that slide deck, and if you still have it, it shows so clearly that we could have added way more than 2 officers. And I would have actually liked to. We have a tremendous amount of service calls coming into that department, and they literally just cannot keep up with it. So I think the answer, the short answer to this question is, we need more than 2 cops. We could have used a lot more than that.
Okay, I'm not debating that. I do recall clearly the presentation, and it was, you know, the data was fairly compelling in terms of the analysis of our, the size of our town, the number of service calls we have, et cetera, and the officers we have relative to other communities. So I'm good with that piece on adding additional officers. I'm just assuming that, you know, the officers today are doing this work, and they're doing what needs to be done, and they're incurring overtime. So by adding officers, I just still can't get there, why we wouldn't also assume that that would have some level of reduction in overtime, planned overtime. And the overtime, what I see here, it's going up, you know, there's 2 lines of it. One is going up 3.5% and one's going up 5.69%. So it just seems at odds with the fact that we're adding people. I mean, I won't belabor that, but I really, and maybe, you know, we don't need to, maybe other board members have questions on this, but I'd love to understand what the assumptions are kind of behind the overtime, and how we think about that relative to adding new officers, again, budget to budget.
Madam Chair, if I could just add, if you don't mind. So we do have contractual obligations with respect to vacation and time off. That tends to add in on replacement overtime and training overtime as well. In addition to that, as Mr. Testani referred to, if we're adding 2 additional police officers, those police officers are going to be in training for 1 year. I won't see those proceeds, I guess you can say, until nearly this time next year. Let's just say, actually, if they were approved in July, it'll probably be March or April of next year that those people will actually be on the road filling a billet per se, or filling a patrol seat. So that's where we're still paying those officers to be in training during that time.
But that's a consistent assumption every year, right? Every year we have vacancies, we have new officers, and so we always incur overtime to do that, right? So
Yes, and where we usually see where we see a savings is on the payroll line. And right now we see a savings in payroll because there are vacancies in the front line. So if we're normally at 108, we're currently at 99 as of 2 weeks from now, because we have two projected. We have about $325,000 in overage currently in our payroll. Savings in payroll, I'm sorry.
Okay, I think, I thought I saw Mr. Curley. I'm still not sure I understand this, so I may follow up again after the meeting. Mr. Curley, do you have a question?
Yeah, just to kind of run this to ground. I understand the point. I think we all do about the two additional hires not bearing fruit, so to speak, not being productive contributor to the force for some time. So let's take them out of the equation for a minute, because I don't think anyone opposes the idea of making sure that you have the funds available to bolster your staff as you see fit. But I guess just to drill down on this overtime point. So let's assume for a second that there were no additional heads that were added, and this overtime would be used for covering time and because you do have, separate from the two additional heads, you do have additional vacancies on the force. So I guess the point that I'm hearing is that even though we have these vacancies, which are causing the need for this overtime to be incurred, we know that there are actually vacancies where that budgeted salary and payroll will not be spent. So in a sense, it's one or the other. And that's the point that I think I'm hearing you express, Madam Chair. And I'm not saying we shouldn't budget for it in the payroll line, but I'm saying that if we have known vacancies, perhaps the inclusion of funding for the overtime would be kind of a double count. And I don't think anyone on this board wants to not everyone wants to make sure you are fully funded to meet the needs of the town. I think that's a bipartisan feeling. But I think we're just really trying to make sure that we understand the numbers. And if there is a double count, that's what we're trying to drill in on. So.
Understood.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Curley. Yeah, maybe just how you came up with that calculation. Again, we can turn back to it because I don't want to, belabor the point, but just want to understand that part better. Okay, other questions from the board?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Testani.
I just have one quick thing, Chief, along the same lines, not on the overtime. I guess I'm a little bit surprised at the vacancy issue, not to get into, privacy issues or HR issues, but has the department had this kind of, for lack of a better phrase, I think you even used it, sudden vacancies or sudden resignations, retirements? I'm not sure what you could comment on just, it seems like it happened sort of suddenly from what you were explaining earlier. And yet at the same time, it sounds like we're getting 4 laterals, which is always great for the town of Fairfield. So just, if you could give us a little bit more info on that, was it a kind of a combination of factors just happened to all hit at the same time, or what was the genesis of that? And is that average for other times as well? I guess is my question as well.
I'll give you a comparison over the last 3 years, which I took a look at this morning. So in FY20, we had 4 officers retire. In FY21, we had 6 officers retire. And in FY22, we had 13 officers retire. So you can see that the increase over the last 3 years. Obviously, last year is significant. We're feeling that in pretty much every area of the police department. It's we were looking at that this morning because we just had an officer come in and tell us that he's going to be leaving in another week. This is a young officer, unexpected to all of us. And I think we're just kind of seeing that across the board in all police departments. And now what we're seeing is that officers are moving from department to department for the best possible job because they see that they're marketable. They're more marketable. It's supply and demand. And it's our biggest resources, you know, as a police department, our people are our biggest resource. So
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that, Chief.
Okay, Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, you just said something that made me think. Do young officers or new officers going through the academy have any obligation to us? Is there something written in their contract that they have to serve the Fairfield Police Department for X number of years after we put them through the academy and all this time and money?
there's a statutory requirement that they must be employed by this department for 2 years.
2 years.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And as you and the deputy chief have alluded, in 2 years you're getting like 6 months out of them. I mean, really on the road, right?
Yeah, we're getting just about a year out of them in a 2-year span. I think what most find is what they come here. We have pretty secure benefits package and comparable to other organizations, and the outside job opportunities are probably far greater than other organizations around us.
Yeah, I get it. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Matola?
Yeah, just following up on what Chris DeWitt said, Chief. I know there's a statute that also says, I forget the time frame, that if you hire an officer and put him through the academy and pay for those costs, and then he or she goes somewhere else within a certain amount of time, you can collect a percentage of the training costs from the other municipality that hired that officer. So you can get something back for the town's expenses of training the officer. That's correct, right?
That is correct. If they leave prior to the 2-year obligation, we could potentially charge the transferring agency or wherever that individual goes for our incurred expenses.
Okay. Has that happened at all, or they usually don't leave Fairfield?
What seems to be happening right now is there are chiefs that are paying a fee to capture that individual before the 2-year mark so that they can secure an officer in their department. So, for example, I think Westport may have secured somebody fairly recently where they paid $40,000 additional to another chief in order to get that individual before the 2-year, where he now becomes marketable, can pretty much choose where that officer wants to go.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Mr. Matola. Other questions from the board? Ms. Marmion?
Thanks very much. I just had a question because you've referenced this a couple of times, the specialized services that Fairfield police officers want to offer, that you want to do kind of modern policing beyond traditional policing. Can you explain that a little bit to us in terms of resources that you need from a budget standpoint? I don't know where we would find that, if you have specialized training, or if you're even talking about specialized training. I looked at your fees and professional services line. It's not really gone up. So where would we find that, or can you explain what you're talking about exactly?
Sure. I'm referring to the extra services that we provide that are essentially expanded outside the patrol function. And those are for example, the Marine unit, the school safety unit, the canine unit. While most of it is funded by outside donations, those salaries we still pay, and there's some support and training that we still fees that we still incur. We have, as the deputy chief referred to, the body camera audit. So we have an officer who basically, so the Police Accountability Act requires us to obviously have body camera footage of every call. So anytime there's testimony or an officer is required to go to court, they're required to have the redacted version of the body camera footage for the court testimony. Further with that, we have the Office of Professional Standards, which consists of policy and accreditation. Now there's a requirement for them from the Police Accountability Act to have an accredited agency through post council. So our policies have to be reviewed by the post council on an annual basis to ensure that they are up to speed, with our statutory requirements.
Okay, thank you very much. And have specific budget lines gone up? I know that you said that K-9 unit is paid for by outside sources, for example, or outside funds, et cetera. But are there budget lines that reflect this kind of need, or is it just kind of included, bundled within your overall budget lines?
It's for the most part bundled in. We break out some of the, as you referred to, as fees and professional services. That doesn't necessarily fall on the special services that we provide, such as the school unit, but our fees and professional services might be a specific training, or if you bring that up, I can give you some examples. Just give me 1 second. I'll give you some specifics in our fees and professional services. So we have technical investigation unit, which is basically phone dumps for investigations. We have text-to-tip technology that is paid for. Psychological testing, which is required by the Police Accountability Act, which is $275 per exam per officer. Drug testing, which incurs about an $8,000 fee per year. All, like I said, all statutorily required by the state of Connecticut.
It's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marmion. Other questions on the budget? Mr. Testani.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Chief, just a quick question on the crash data retrieval line of $20,000.
Yes, sir.
Is that something that we had investigated in terms of trying to include that into the ARPA funding? Is it available for a potential grant? I just want to get a little bit more info on that.
Yeah, so that is a piece of technology that we have where we can, if you're familiar with a black box in an airplane that they talk about all the time, essentially vehicles have the same thing. And in order to retrieve that information, we have to have a kit or technology that assists us in obtaining that information. So we would go get a search warrant from the court. The court would issue a search warrant for us to obtain that information, and then we need the technical equipment to pull it from the vehicle. And as you know, there are many different types of vehicles, and that technology supports many different types of vehicles.
Right. No, I understand. I'm just curious if is it possible to get that 20,000 funded by some other source, whether it's ARPA or a grant? Had the department looked into that at all?
We pursued a grant, and there is no grant for that technology.
And it doesn't come under the ARPA funding. Is that fair to say? It's not ARPA eligible, or whatever the right terminology might be?
I wouldn't be able to answer that.
Okay. If we could look into that, Madam
So-
Chair, through the chair with Jared, maybe we
So,
could
Mr.
double check that.
Testani, we have allocated all the ARPA funds in the presentations we made throughout all the boards. And all the ARPA funds are allocated for specific projects. So this isn't something that that I presented to the town boards or that were voted on. So all the ARPA funds are allocated towards specific items already.
Okay, and I'm sorry, Chief, you said there wasn't anything in the way of a grant that could cover the 20,000. I'm just curious. I mean, we're not talking about a lot of money. I just wondered.
Yeah, according to my lieutenant, we pursued a grant, but there were no grants that would support that.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Appreciate that, Chief. Thank the lieutenant for me too.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. I have a couple of quick questions. Oh, I'll have Mr. Walsh go
Go
first.
ahead, Madam Chairwoman, you're first.
Okay. Chief, just a question on the motor vehicle fuel and lube. That's up 64%, and obviously I think we're all aware of what's happening with fuel prices, but I was wondering if you could explain how you calculated that. And the reason I ask is that while all of the departments have shown increases in that line item, this one in percentage terms is particularly high. We did hear that there was a formula or a fuel price given to the departments to do that calculation. So I guess I'm wondering why, in relative terms, this one is going up more. Is there going to be more driving, or is it just the fuel cost that's making this $120,000 above last?
We haven't changed anything. We use 110,000 gallons, and we've received the price of $2.51 a gallon, and that's what the calculation is.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, it's funny because I don't know, maybe it's a question for Jared, but as you look across the departments, I mean, you have usage and you have price, and if price is being applied equivalently across all of the departments, usage must be varying dramatically.
It was supposed to be.
Another quick question, Chief. On the we have a 3 maintenance line items there, and could you just help me understand? We have maintenance equipment, buildings and grounds, and automotive. What's covered under equipment?
So maintenance and repair of equipment would be like recertifying our radars, our radar units or our laser units. Things like our equipment that we wear on our belts, equipment that's used in the department, computers. Let's see, repair maintenance, laser units, intoximeter for DUIs, photo and video equipment, weapons, computers, electronic tools, and investigative tools.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And then we have building and grounds, which is relatively flat to last year. And then we have automotive, which is declined, not a lot in terms of dollars, but it's less than half of last year. Is that in anticipation of getting the new vehicles?
Well, that's in anticipation of so what we've seen trending continuously is a consistent reduction, or over the last couple of years, an increase in the return that we get, or the revenue that we get for the usage of the cars when the vendors hire our vehicles. So that some of that money, $20 per hour, goes back into the maintenance and repair of our vehicles in that fund, which but we can make those assumptions, but in order to, I guess, adjust for it, what we did is we lowered that this year to try to adjust a little bit out of it, because we were seeing an increase in the revenue coming in.
Okay, and I'm sorry if I missed this, but the revenue comes from whom exactly?
The vendors for when a vendor hires a police officer and asks for a vehicle to be included in that, they get charged a fee as well.
Okay.
And
so
some
that's
of that
on top of
fee.
Okay, got it. Okay, very good. Thank you. Mr. Walsh, I'll turn to you.
Good evening, Chief, again.
Hello.
Let me, couple questions in regards to earlier about some officers that were training and leave after 2 years. Why would officers leave after 2 years when they're basically starting at zero in the next department they go to, right? That's what they would happen here. They would go back to being a brand new officer, starting at zero, losing any contribution toward pension, steps, anything else like that, right?
Well, I can't really speak on what officers do or why they would go somewhere else. Any contributions that they would make to their pension, they would get in return, obviously with no interest earned, but they would get the contributions back. Some officers go to federal agencies. Very few, I would say, and I think this is what you might be looking for. I'm making an assumption here, but very few go to other departments nearby.
Okay.
Yeah, we've had two very recent officers. One completely got out of police work. I should say two recently, fairly newer officers. Both got completely out of police work, a male and a female officer.
All right. At the beginning of your presentation, you stated that we needed the 2 new officers. I guess one of the driving reasons you said was for, I thought I heard you say officer burnout.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct? Is that what it's really for? Is it basically all of the people that were down officers and everyone's having to work overtime? Is that what it's for?
Yeah, so, what we're seeing is a compounding effect where officers are getting ordered over to fill slots, to answer calls for service around the clock. And obviously, it usually ends up the junior officer. But what happens is the officers end up getting ordered 4 hours over. And then if the midnight shift, let's say, for example, so let's say a day shift officer gets ordered 4 hours over, and then the midnight shift officer, there's still that open vacancy, that officer would get ordered 16. Obviously, there's a maximum of time that they can stay on. They would then go home for 8 hours and come back in the morning and could potentially get ordered over again. This cycle continues over and over. It's usually the junior officers that get the short end of that stick. And then we see an increase in sick time, and this is cyclical.
Because when I saw the 2 extra officers in there, I presumed it was because of possible increased crime in our town, which at least when you look at social media and reports, it seems like there is increased crime. So I thought it was to combat that, but you're telling me that it's not to combat that.
So statistically, there is an uptick in certain crimes. I think because of social media and because we are probably a little bit more transparent, we give out more information than maybe previous administrations did. So that you might see more reporting of crime, or the news reports are more prevalent. So with respect to the staffing, I think that because of the uptick in some crimes, or maybe more serious crimes, it is going to help with that. Let's be frank. I mean, I could use 10 more officers based on what departments of this size are, comparatively speaking, throughout the state of Connecticut. Most departments of our size are at 120 officers. I couldn't honestly come in here and ask for 10 officers in 1 year. I think you'd probably laugh me off the Zoom. So, I think we have to start, evaluate, see what we need, and then move forward with that.
Okay, so should we be expecting, I mean, basically what I'm hearing you say is that you need more than just the 2. But you understand that budgetarily and for our taxpayers, we can't afford more than that in a given year in order to have a reasonable tax increase. So should we be expecting that you're going to be coming back to us to add additional officers in the near future?
I think you could expect that I'm going to seriously evaluate the benefits of these officers. Now, I'll remind you, I'm not going to see the benefits of these officers until next year.
Yes,
So, yeah. So we're going to evaluate that, and then we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Based on the statistics that you're seeing, are we having a crime wave now in this town and in the surrounding areas? Or is this, as you said, a little bit from social media, from you guys putting out some things, which I think is great. It warns everybody about something that might be in your neighborhood.
Sure.
But it also, it seems like other people are talking about, you know, cars being stolen in their neighborhood, their car being gone through that night. I mean, all open cars. I don't quite understand it, but all open cars and people leaving their key fobs in the car. But do you think we're seeing a crime wave more than we have seen in the past, or does it just appear that way?
I think we're seeing, anecdotally, I feel like we're seeing it. I think statistically a little bit in certain crimes, like you referred to, the car break-ins, if you want to call them break-ins, they're open cars. They are technically burglaries, but we are seeing it, and we're seeing it in droves, and it's not just us, it's across the state. So to your point, I guess the answer to your question is yes, we are.
Yeah. I mean, this happened to a good friend of mine. I'm like, you left your car unlocked, you left your key fob in. To me, that's like letting people borrow your car. And I forget what the name of that service is, but it's kind of like allowing someone to borrow your car if you're not really protecting it. But kind of moving out from that, something else you addressed earlier is bulletproof vests. You said that they have a general life of 5 years. To me, that seems low, but I'm not in your business. I mean, I presume there's a lot of movement and people are wearing them every day. So maybe that's the wear and tear that I'm not really seeing. Is technology changing in that a lot? Like that's part of the reason for the replacement, or is it just wear and tear of wearing everything 40 to 60 hours a week that I'm not understanding? I guess not understanding.
Yeah, so let's say an officer is wearing it for 60 hours a week on average. I'll put it to you this way. If you wore the same t-shirt 60 hours a week, do you think it would wear out after 5 years?
I would think so, but I also see those vests that they wear and they seem pretty heavy duty.
Yeah, so there's a
Well, I
line.
hope they are to protect a bullet from going through it. So
Yeah. I think the industry standard or the industry expectation is that the Kevlar degrades over time, and the 5 years is the industry standard.
Right.
Yeah.
That seems to make sense. If you don't mind going to your budget, your revenue page, I just have a couple of questions. Maybe you can quickly
Sure.
answer me on revenue. There's a couple of what I would call changes that seem a little bit more dramatic than normal, and maybe there's a reason for that. So under police revenue on page 10 of the budget, if I go under the police surcharge, what is that? So if you give a motor vehicle violation, some portion of that comes back to the department and the rest goes to the state of Connecticut?
That is correct, sir.
Okay, so it seems to be going down 15.66%. Does that mean that we're just giving out less tickets, or they have reduced the amount of what each ticket costs, like what the fee is?
Well, it's different for the types of violations.
Okay. So some of the tickets are going down, and on others they've reduced the fee?
Well, no, if we wrote an inordinate amount of speeding tickets and the return on that speeding or the surcharge on that speeding ticket is $10 back to the municipality, then we receive the $10 for every speeding ticket that we give. But let's say the reduction in speeding, or there was a reduction in speeding tickets, but maybe an increase in stop signs where we get 50% of the surcharge.
Oh, I see. I thought it was I mistakenly made the assumption that it was like you got, for example, 20% on whatever the value of the ticket was for all charges. But they changed that. There's varying amounts for depending on what the allegation or whatever the violation is. Excuse me.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. On the police alarm ordinance, it's going down by like 25%. Are we just giving out less, or are people finally woken up that they don't want to pay for all these fake alarms and pay the fee?
To be honest, I think this is a result of COVID where more people are working from home.
Great point. That's a good point. Okay. On the miscellaneous police charges, they're down 32%. What is miscellaneous police revenue?
So it's like the charges that we have for funeral escorts. We have some, we share some revenue with parking authority. And that's pretty much it.
Back to body cams, if you can just get back to us where in the budget any portion of the body cam whole system is in the budget, that'd be great. I don't want to belabor it here tonight, but
Absolutely. I'll get that back to you. Okay.
on the maintenance, repair, and auto, I know we just took a quick look at it, but it's down by 56%.
Yes, sir.
Why is that down 56%? I mean, it seems like we'd have the same amount of repairs on our automobiles, unless you're telling me we've got all new automobiles or something, and maybe that's the case. I don't know.
Well, we're seeing a consistent use and hiring from vendors. So we're getting a return on that in the revenue field, which is supporting that maintenance and repair budget.
Okay. All right. And you mentioned something about that earlier, especially on the private jobs where they're paying us at $20 an hour, correct?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. And then in regards to your personnel summary, I know you're going up to 2 police officers, but net, you're only really up 1 personnel because you're getting rid of an IT support technology person.
That's correct.
Somebody else doing that work, like the town of Fairfield's IT department, or is there a reason to get rid of that position?
So the IT person is going to be supporting the IT department and will be called upon on an as-needed basis for our organization.
Gotcha.
It's a transfer, Jim.
Yep. Okay. And that's all I have, Chief. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to make sure everyone gets their questions answered. I also just want to try to be mindful of our time. We are 1 department and we are at 9 p.m. already. So, Mr. Stark, did you have something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not here to answer questions, but adding to the chief's response on the bulletproof vests, I actually have owned a bulletproof vest maker in my investing career, and it is the standard around the country that they get retired after 5 years, as he said, because of union contracts, and also because people don't maintain the same body shape from over 5-year periods. I think we can all sympathize. And they're actually these days moving toward polyethylene rather than Kevlar, which actually helps them make them more affordable. Anyway, that's all I wanted to add.
All right, thank you. Interesting. Mr. DeWitt?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My last question to the chief, in just in regarding personnel, I know we're going to talk about the ECC budget later on, and I was looking at that budget in the personnel there. Is there no support person from the police department assigned to the ECC? Is that correct?
So we have currently a captain that is in charge of the ECC. And we have a lieutenant that was previously a dispatcher, so has some pretty detailed knowledge in that department, and he assists us up there as well. We are finding that it is a pretty big lift with regards to operations.
No, I can imagine. So, but those 2 people are accounted for in the police budget, not the self-sustaining ECC. Is that correct? That's
correct, yes.
Okay.
And I believe that the captain, it it is in the interlocal agreement that a captain is to supervise or command the emergency communication center.
Oh, got it. Okay. Okay. So that's great. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt.
Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Castelli.
I just have one quick thing, Chief, on the revenue line, just to get to same line of questioning as Mr. Walsh. The police parking violation fees, 42201, looks like it went up. And maybe that corresponds to the surcharge reduction on the motor vehicle violations, but the parking went up almost the same percentage, 15.96%. So that's 123,000 3-year average, right? So I'm curious, is that, again, potentially COVID, more people parking, just randomly not parking correctly? I know we only recently started collecting fees out of the parking lots, right, from the train stations. So I'm just curious about the parking violation fee increase and maybe some clues on where not to park in the future.
Well, I can't give you clues on not to park, but I can tell you why that's probably up a little bit. We went to a new LPR plate reader technology last year to assist in our parking enforcement downtown, and it's basically a technology-based system. So there's not much room for error in regards to violations. So,
just curious, is that the same system where the guards around the parking lots for the train station can point something at the car, I guess, and find out if the car's a registered plate or not within the town of Fairfield, or is that separate technology?
it's separate. This is a license plate reader that kind of locates the vehicle on a map and identifies how long it's been there. In essence, the parking authority, I mean the LPR vehicle, and the officer or the special officer that we have driving it basically drives around, and then when a violation comes up, the computer tells the officer when he has to issue the infraction or issue the parking violation.
Okay, that's great.
So there's more consistency and less. Yeah, it's just more efficient.
Yeah, sounds like it. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate
Thank you.
everything again.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Testani. We're gonna move on. Before we do, I think Mr. Schmidt, did you have a quick follow-up on the fuel budget?
Yes, as I was looking at the actual that was spent on fuel this year, and it looks like the issue is more with the base with this year and how much is being spent this year, because the police department is almost at budget. Their actual spending is almost at budget already this year. So it's not so much that what we're budgeting for next year is high as it is that what we budgeted for this year is probably low for whatever reason was budgeted at.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. Appreciate
And I
it.
think Frank has some additional information on that item.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay, go ahead.
oh, sorry. Oh, no, I was just gonna say, just for clarification, that the motor vehicle fuel and lube line includes gasoline as well as diesel. So if you're comparing it across multiple departments, the mix of what they use as far as diesel versus gasoline is different. So the increases aren't going to be perfectly consistent. So I believe just the increase for gasoline was, I think, around a 76% increase. So it was a little bit lower than the actual general gasoline increase. So I just wanted to provide that.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you. Glad we could take a follow-up item off the list, so I appreciate that. All right, I'm going to move on. Next on the agenda, we have Animal Control Department 4050, which begins on page 149 of the budget book. This is a $342,000 budget with a small decrease of 1.4% from last year. So I'm going to suggest we just jump into Q&A on this one. Does anybody on the board have any questions on animal control? All right. Okay, Chief, you're off the hook on that one. Okay, moving on. I can't promise the next one is going to be quite this easy.
It's not.
So we're going to turn to the Emergency Communications Center. So before we discuss this budget for the benefit of the public, and maybe the board, the ECC Department 4150 was moved to its own separate fund, which is under the self-supporting tab of the budget book, and it begins on page 253. The comparable numbers for this year's budget, fiscal 22, are not shown in that self-supporting section. They're in multiple places in the budget book for last year. There's revenues in the revenue section. There's expenses on page 160, except for some healthcare and pension expenses that were pulled out from separate departments. So as a result of that, the finance department pulled together a summary to kind of show us an apples to apples comparison. I believe Mr. Schmidt sent that out to the board shortly before the meeting. And we can share it on the screen if that makes it easier for the board. But before we do that, I just wanted to, what is best, Chief, from your perspective? Do you want to just give an overview first? Do you want to dive into the numbers and put the thing on the screen? What do you prefer?
I think we should just dive into the numbers.
Okay. Jared, would you mind sharing that comparison then? And again, for the board members, it may be easier to look at your email version, which came at a little before 7 p.m. Okay, so this is the expense side of the budget. We can talk about the revenue separately. Chief, I guess I'll turn it over to you. I mean, we can see that when you look at these expenses on an apples to apples basis, they're up about roughly 6% year over year. Do you want to talk through any of the significant items on here?
I'll probably leave that to Jared to speak on for starters.
Okay.
Sure. And just so everybody knows on the, if you want to look at we have this document that does the comparison, but just to highlight these in the budget, the general fund revenue, which was removed, you'll see it's at zero that's on page 14. General fund spending was on page 160, 161, and that's all been removed except for one piece of it, which I'll get to in a minute. The new fund is, as the chairwoman pointed out, is on page 254 and 255. So what you have here is a 22 to 23 comparison. You'll see that most of the line items equate to what the line items were budgeted for FY22. There are some that are in there that are a little bit different, and there are some that are, remain at zeros. Except when you go to the bottom, you'll see also that there were some other, so the top portion relates to things that were in the ECC budget, and the bottom portion has to do mostly with benefits, healthcare, retirement, and then also the contingency amount that was in the budget. And so those are, that's what you see at the bottom. So those in the 22 budget, you wouldn't see them anywhere in ECC because they were consumed within the line items within the other orgs, whether it was the pension contribution or the 401A contribution. All the ECC stuff was consumed within those. So what we had to do was, pull those out of there, extract those from those line items that were in the general fund part of the budget, and put those into 22 so that we could make the apples to apples comparison. The overall is pretty clear here. There's $172,000 increase. One of the things, so probably the big piece is the contingency. And this contingency was the amount for 22 was the amount that we had actually put into contingency. And the 23 amount is the amount that is actually related to the newly adopted ECC contract. So that's one big piece of it. The retirement contribution was a little bit low. What we had put in for the pension amount was a little bit low. So that got just doing the estimate from 22 was a little bit low. And then we had to add in some increase in regular payroll at the top for the typical longevity steps and those kinds of things. So those are the major pieces of it. So one thing I'll point out, this is it's a self-funded budget, a new budget, just like, to draw parallels, WPCA and the fire training school. It's a parallel to those. The one thing I'll say about this is that the amount of revenue that is coming into this budget from other sources is not enough to make it fully 100% self-sustainable. So what you'll see on page, as I mentioned, page 160, 161 of the general fund, you'll see a dollar amount of appropriation there in what is the current ECC, which is essentially to subsidize the amount of money that's needed to fund the ECC fund. Are there any questions?
Yeah, thank you for that, Mr. Schmidt. And just as maybe for our newer board members and as a reminder to the board, I think we a year ago talked about doing this and adding the fully loaded costs into a separate fund for the ECC in anticipation of having other towns participate in the ECC and, having our cost structure all in one place so that when we're looking at the financials and looking to either provide support or negotiate other costs with other towns, we would have the full range of costs in this budget. So that's why this was done. I know that's a lot. Since everyone has this on their email, I might suggest that we take it down off the screen so that we can see everyone and open this up to questions. All right, I'll start with Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jared, your last statement I completely did not follow. Right? Here's what I did follow. If I'm looking at page 254 and 255, there is a revenue amount of $3.1 million. And then subsequently on 256, there's a expense side to that. So those match up, right? Revenue matches, revenue matches the expenses. But then you said, well, we don't have enough revenues to cover. And then look at 160 and 161. So I'm confused. Are you telling me the two numbers on 160 and 161, do they not equal that $3 million? I'm confused where the gap is.
No, so you're absolutely right. The amount that you see there as the transfer in, that's the amount that's needed as a subsidy from the general fund. That is notwithstanding a small clerical error, the amount that's appropriated on page 161 should be equal to the amount that's in there as the transfer from the general fund. That's what I mean. So those other two revenue items there, the other ECC subsidy and the state ECC subsidy, they don't fully fund the fund, and they don't fully fund the operation.
Got it. So in other words, if I may simplify for my small mind, Budget 4150 only exists in this year's budget because we as the town need to put in $1.736 million to make the revenue number on 254 equal that 3.1.
That's correct.
Next year, 4150, God willing, we don't have to transfer any more money from anywhere else in there, right? Next year, hopefully 4150 will not exist as a budget line item, and we'll have enough revenue from wherever we get revenue from to make that 3.1 million operating cost.
So that would, what would happen, if that happens, then this would be a break-even proposition. And we've never pitched it as such. There's always going to be some kind of subsidy. I don't think the center has enough capacity to take in enough towns and create enough revenue to be able to make this a break-even or something that, or to make it something that's profitable. What it does though, is it costs us less. So that amount that you see appropriated in the ECC budget is less than what it has been in the past. And the hope is that each year that we will add towns and that amount of savings will continue to increase over time.
So understand, so said another way, the town of Fairfield is getting some value obviously from the ECC. And because we haven't fully outsourced or gotten any revenue from other sources, we still have to pay for our own value. But it was never intended that we would get so many outside sources that it would be free for Fairfield residents. So we're going to have to pay into this. And I say pay is it's a cost avoidance, right? It's not a cost because we're getting a service out of it. So that makes a lot of sense. So thank you for that explanation.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Walsh.
Here, on page 160, does the contribution from the town, the 1,736,174, show that the number we're actually paying for the ECC is actually going down from the previous year?
It does.
So there's actually a savings for what we're doing.
Yeah, it does. You know, it's hard to see when you just look at the line items and the budget. You really have to take into account the revenue because the town of Fairfield actually pays 100% of the fronts, kind of 100% of the cost, but then we get reimbursed by Westport and any new towns that come in. So you really have to net everything out. But we are seeing that it would be less than what we would otherwise have paid.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Schmidt, can I just, and Mr. Walsh, that's a good question. I was trying to figure that out myself from the numbers. I think, and Mr. Schmidt, correct me if I'm wrong, the way I look at it is that if you look at the comparative expenses on this analysis that you gave us, the expenses on a year-over-year basis go up by 172,000. But the budgeted revenues, the others ECC subsidies and the state ECC subsidies go up by 193,000. So there's,
We're doing better.
yeah, it looks on a net basis, we're about 20 grand better than we were last year, is how I'm reading it.
Yeah, and it was on one of the slides in the first Selectwoman's presentation where I did a comparison to FY20, and that shows an even greater savings. And so, you know, again, it's even with the information that's in the budget here, I would say that the amount of savings is greater than $20,000, but I'd have to go back and do a comparison between this year or next year and this year.
Okay, yeah, I'm just.
And it's difficult too, because it's not in operation the way it's, you know, the way it's going to be next year.
Okay, so 2 points, and I'm just going by what's in the book. I'm comparing the other and the state ECC subsidies year over year. And we've budgeted those to increase by slightly more than the expenses are increasing on a year over year basis. I calculated 20 something thousand. But if that's not right, you can follow up with us. I guess the other question I have on this, and before I yield to others, is I thought when we talked about this fund, there was some discussion about perhaps including debt service costs in here to reflect the fact that we are, paying for capital upfront. And so, that debt service is part of this operation, and presumably we would want to, think about that in the context of what we're recapturing in fees from other towns. Does that, am I misremembering that?
No, there was that conversation. You're correct. The issue is that if we put debt service in here, then the way that the interlocal agreement is laid out and the way the calculation is laid out in the interlocal agreement with Westport, if we were to put debt service in here, they'd effectively be paying debt service twice, because they're issuing their own bonds to pay for their portion, their half portion of the building of the project. So then if we were to now put in a debt service payment here, they would also be picking up a portion of that. And so, we didn't include it. We couldn't include it in there because it just wouldn't be fair to them. Now, that's not to say that for future towns, we can't account for that in some way. And I think it might be appropriate to have a conversation in executive session in the future on this to talk about the options there and what's underlying the assumptions on the revenue side in here. But there are ways that we can account for that to ensure that towns coming in are at least picking up some portion of that.
Okay, thank you for that. And yeah, I just for the benefit of the board, we do have an executive session scheduled on Thursday. So if there are questions about the revenue assumptions in the ECC, and they do assume that we bring in another town next year, we would reserve any detailed questions on that for Thursday, if that's okay with everyone. All right, thank you for that clarification, Mr. Schmidt. Other questions on this budget? Okay, I don't see anybody's hands. Either everybody has it or everybody's thoroughly confused. So I'm not, I'm not sure which it is. Okay. Well, that one was easier than I thought. Okay, well, I guess we'll move on then. Let's see here. All right, so we're going to go on to fire. And so, Chief Calamaris, I think you're off the hook.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the board for your questions. I'll get back to you with the answers that were requested.
Great job, Chief. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you for your good night. Yeah, thank you for your patience and staying as long as you did. We appreciate it, and thanks to your department for everything you do.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we are going to move on to fire, and we have Chief McCarthy with us. Welcome, Chief. Thanks for your patience.
Yeah, good evening. Good to be with you.
So we have, I'll leave it up to you how you want to walk through the budget. We do have the revenue piece, which is on, let me find it here. I didn't make a note to myself earlier. I'm not sure where the revenue piece is. I'll let you decide whether you want to kick off with revenue or expenses, but why don't you hit the highlights and then we'll try to jump into Q&A.
Okay, so let's start with revenue. That's on page 9 of the budget book, from the page 9 that I have. And we had originally projected 400,000 for this fiscal year. We've downgraded that estimate to 300,000. We're currently at 147,000 with many of the large projects that we anticipated that have already come in. And we estimated next year's revenue to be at 150. And there are some significant reasons behind those changes in our revenue projections. As you know, Fairfield University and Sacred Heart have had very robust building plans, and they have brought in significant revenue that has driven to a large extent the project. You think of Sacred Heart's hockey arena, 2 dormitories, another one this year, Fairfield University with the Convocation Center and some smaller dormitories, and in previous years, parking garage and other facilities. We are at the tail end of that construction boom, and the benefit to our revenue projections will suffer as a result of the end of that process. At the same time, the other generators of revenue for the fire department permit fees are limited to commercial buildings. We don't, unlike the building department, we don't get any revenue from single family or 1 or 2 family dwellings. Even some small multi-families, 4 units in a single building, if they have an appropriate fire protection, they're considered 2 families or single families and don't fall under the purview of the fire department. There are almost 18 projects that have been stalled for various reasons. They were originally included in our projection for this year, but if you think of some of the more significant ones, the Metro Center, Upper Park Avenue by the Parkway, Upper Black Rock Turnpike opposite High Ho, Thorpe Street, Lower Uncle Road, and Exide Battery, and Bronson Road. Those projects have been stalled for one reason or another, partly because of opposition or permitting challenges, other because of neighborhood opposition, and some of them are 830Gs, as you know, and are familiar with. So we are seeing a significant slowdown in the traffic for those commercial projects. And there is no good way for us to project when they might hit, if they're going to hit at all. So we have adjusted down our revenue projections for this year and next as a result of those changes. We expect that some of them will come to fruition and will generate fees for us. Even if they do, individual projects that I described will not compare to the type of fee generation that came out of the 2 universities. And it's clear that that is slowing down. There won't be a dead stop, but we're not seeing the very large development in commercial buildings. I mean, school dormitories in particular at the 2 universities. So with that, if you would like me to go to the rest of the budget, we'll come back for questions, or if there's questions now for revenue, I'll be glad to take them.
Yeah, why don't we pause and take any questions on revenue? Do any board members? Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to help the chief out because I know what the question is going to come up about the fire marshal, right, that we added. We didn't add the fire marshal for revenue purposes. We added the fire marshal because he's really busy doing a lot of stuff, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So even though we're seeing a reduction in revenue, which isn't great, right? We still need that extra fire marshal to be doing his job. Like you said, of the other work that we don't generate revenue on. Is that not correct?
So just a brief history, as you recall, the construction boom that was occurring in the town of Fairfield and has occurred was drawing all of the resources out of the fire marshal's office to manage those projects and conduct ongoing inspections for the construction process. So whether it's plan reviews or job site inspections, the fire marshal's office was nearly completely dedicated to construction management and inspections for code compliance. We were not meeting our statutory obligation to inspect the freestanding independent multifamily dwellings, the area that most concerns us, the absolute necessity that they be inspected for life safety reasons. These were facilities where people go to sleep at night, and we want to make sure that they're properly protected and are kept up to the current fire code. We made a justification for the additional position and have dedicated that person exclusively to multifamily dwelling inspections. As the and that person cannot do all the multifamilies in a given year. When you think of all of what we're building in the town of Fairfield, and the increase in housing units are in multifamily dwellings, which come under the purview of the fire department. As the demand shifts from construction management and ongoing inspections, we'll transition the rest of the staff to more focused attention on inspections of existing facilities of all types, but most importantly, multifamily.
All right, thanks, Chief. Like I said, I knew that was coming up, so I wanted to give you a chance to address it before we went too far. So thank you for that explanation. My gift to you, my budget gift to you, Chief.
That the only one tonight?
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Appreciate it. I'm sure that question was in fact going to come up. Mr. Curley.
Yeah, and I think this is probably redundant, so I apologize, but it just didn't completely sit with me. Chief, first off, thanks for being here. If I heard you correctly at the start, you mentioned that your current year fee level is about 147,000. So the request for next year is in line with where you are this year. And I understand the point that you made about some of the projects being delayed, and there's been a slowdown. But if I look at the 3-year trend of actuals, historicals on page 17, it was 318,000 in fiscal year 19, 615,000 in fiscal year 21, 371,000 in fiscal year 22. So it seems like there was a slowdown this year, but I don't know. I guess I don't know if this is a question for you or you, Mr. DeWitt, Chris. But it seems like the 150 this year would be against the trend, and perhaps the current year is an outlier. So I guess I'm just second guessing whether that number is the request for this year is artificially low.
So when we develop the revenue projection for the upcoming year, we do this at the time of the budget submission. So it is even dated today, but it is in consultation with the building official, with economic development, with planning and zoning director, and myself and the fire marshal. We get together, we look at those projects, some of which I listed earlier. What are the chances that they might come to fruition in the upcoming year? And, you know, what is the scope and magnitude of the problem? Obviously, the Convocation Center at Sacred Heart, at Fairfield University generated $78,000 of income in our revenue. The hockey arena generated $92,000 of revenue. So those are very big projects. None of those types of projects are on the horizon. There will be some, we have seen the projects that are queued up have been queued up for year over year. You think of the Metro Center as a good example. This is a project that nearly came to permit and approval, or actual coming in with a phased development plan 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, the project struck cold. There's been some movement recently of reinstituting that phased approach, and a little bit more conservatively than what was proposed 2.5 years ago. Thorpe Street, same thing. This was a project that was ready to go 2 years ago. And as I approach the budget projection or the revenue projection for next year, how much weight do I put on a project that's been sitting and idling at the curb for 2 years, with the expectation that it might come up this year? It is truly crystal ball kind of guessing market conditions, permitting challenges, and neighborhood opposition for some of these projects. These projects are occurring in difficult development environments, physically difficult to develop because they are being proposed in maybe underutilized open space or tear down. They are using 830G for some of the development, which it almost is expected that there's going to be some legal challenges. The properties have conservation challenges as well as you develop on previously undevelopable land, and you come up with steam to do that. There's conservation issues related to those projects. So there are multiple factors that are dampening the ability to bring these projects to completion. And we have taken a conservative approach because we have seen wild fluctuation just in the numbers that you have listed, Mr. Curley, from previous years. Wild fluctuation, 600 and change to 300. We have seen, within very good years, year-over-year fluctuations that are pretty significant.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Walsh.
Good evening, Chief. Thanks for being here.
Good evening.
Your numbers on your revenue numbers for the fire marshal's fees, were they prepared in coordination with the building department?
Yes.
Because their fees seem to be going up by 10%, and yours are going down by 62.5%.
So,
I'm left with thinking, are they all doing residential projects? Is that the driver for their stuff?
Sorry to interrupt. As we heard from the building official, both the previous and the current, they have had significant renovation construction in the residential environment, which, as I stated earlier, doesn't include the fire department. It's not within our lane or purview. They just swimming pools alone. They were generating significant revenue. Home offices and renovations during COVID have driven their numbers. The word that we're receiving from the building department is that has not slowed. There is significant investment in residential property that is driving their numbers. Their fees are for commercial construction. If ours are down, theirs are down. It is the same projects that are generating revenue. They're making up a significant portion of that and beyond in the residential market.
Okay. It surprises me, I'll tell you that much. I had the honor of being with our university president of a major school in the last year. And his comment to me when I asked him about building and all the building going on, he's like, you should be seeing building at every university in the United States of America. Because if you're not building right now, you're at a commercial disadvantage when we're charging $75,000 a year or more to students. He's like, people don't want old stuff. We have to be competitive, and that's going to be continuing for the foreseeable future. So it just surprises me that all of a sudden Sacred Heart and Fairfield University are going to be slowing down in the coming year. Maybe they're just taking a break and re-seeing what they're doing and whatever, but it just surprised me.
we know that Fairfield University is running out of space to build on. The build out at Sacred Heart, particularly in the dormitories, has spent a significant amount of money and developed on-campus housing. There is talk of additional dormitories that would be built on West Campus. We just learned of that this week, and we'll watch that closely. Those are expected to be smaller developments than what we've seen on main campus, and as a result, will generate lower revenue.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Chief. Why don't we go ahead and move on to the expense side of the budget, which is on page one, begins on page 139. And Chief, if you want to do, go through this briefly and hit the high points, we'll then jump into Q&A.
So there's a number of drivers in the increase in the fire department budget, and I'll go through them. The sick relief account 51062 is up, is lower. The increase is lower than the 3-year average, but as you recall, we have attempted to, and in previous years, went below the 3-year average, and we got burnt last year, and we're over budget, significantly over budget. Same as it relates to injury. We have increased that budget by $30,000 or 20%. We have had a number of employees that have had either injuries or off-duty orthopedic issues that kept them out for significant portions of the year. And there's a couple of cases that we don't expect to be resolved before July 1st. And as much as I have in the past attempted to project lower, be more conservative, figured that we were over a hump in those two particular budgets, has proven not to be the case. We have projected and requested a budget increase, but below the 3-year average. Training relief. As the police department commented, we are as well anticipating retirements. Retirements require us to send employees to the academy for 14 weeks or 15 weeks. And that will take them, as soon as they come back, they come right on the line, pretty much. But any time of the year an employee retires, we can't send them to the academy until the 2 academies start, one in September, the other one in February. So there are some vacancy challenges in the intervening period, and then while they're away at school. Those costs are essentially $50,000 per employee that goes to the fire academy. And we anticipate that we will have maybe 5 if the contract is settled. We may have upwards of 5 firefighters retire next year for various reasons, but we need to be prepared for that. This past year, we did have a number of employees leave. We're fortunate that we did have 2 lateral transfers, and one from the city of Bridgeport and one from Charleston, South Carolina. So that helped us get through this fiscal year with some vacancies that came up. Further down on that, you will see increase in our records our IT software. We have a records management system that is at end of life, not supported by the company anymore, and we are investigating a replacement with a new records management software and have to build in what we expect to be a significant increase in the cost of that. Fees and professional services. This past year, we have been, as you all can imagine, the healthcare system is challenging, to say the least. And how it affected the fire department, we're obligated to send every employee for a fitness for duty exam every year. And due to mergers and acquisitions of medical providers, our provider quit the town of Fairfield and chose not to continue service because it didn't fit the corporate profile. And we had to go out and find another vendor. In that process, we could not find a vendor that would accept insurance payment. These physicals were previously paid for by the town of Fairfield provided health insurance. So we had to direct, we are now direct bill. The fortunate part of the equation is that we were able to negotiate a better rate for direct bill services for annual physicals than we were receiving through the health insurance. So the town was paying the health insurance through an administrator, and we are now paying it direct at a lower cost. There would be changes in that other budget, but insignificant given the size of the health insurance budget. But those costs are now absorbed almost completely by the fire department, and that represents that increase in the fees and professional services. The motor vehicle fuel and lube, I would just say that you've talked about it with other departments. We have consistently budgeted for 22,000 gallons of diesel fuel. That number has been very stable over the past 5 or 6 years. We haven't seen any significant change in that. It is despite some increases in the calls for service for the fire department, it has not affected the overall demand or usage, and it, as I said, it stayed pretty stable at $22,000. And the last item that I want to bring to your attention is capital outlay. Capital outlay includes several significant projects that did not appear in the budget previously. We have requested for 2 new vehicles. A brief history, and we bought a new vehicle last year, a staff vehicle. Prior to that, the last time we purchased a new vehicle was 2013. We have several Crown Vics that were hand-me-downs from the police department from 2008 that we need to retire. So this purchase will allow us to retire those 2 vehicles, and we're not ready for EV vehicles in the fire department. Battery life with emergency lights and other equipment maintained by the department and radios. You know, EV has not been a proven technology for emergency services yet. So these will be standard gasoline engine vehicles. The other item in the capital budget that is significant, we've requested $125,000 to replace portable radios. As you know, the fire department, the police department have been, had in the waterfall a overhaul and complete replacement of our radio systems. We are close to moving that project forward, but we are at a point where we cannot communicate with our mutual aid neighbors, and some of our radios are beyond life, and our inventory of serviceable radios is going down. We have to make this purchase prior to the radio project coming forward, but I can assure you that the radios that we'll be purchasing out of our capital budget will be identical to the radios that we're purchasing out of the major radio system overhaul. So they will be interoperable, and there'll be no wasted effort or expense if we purchase these at this point. I would certainly prefer that, this is absorbed by the larger radio project. But the timing of that is not one that we can tolerate. So we need to make this purchase now. And with that, I will pause for questions about the budget.
All right, thank you, Chief. A lot of good information there. Appreciate the summary. Questions from the board? Mr. Mottola.
Hey, Chief, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Just remind me, the town's capital radio project, it says absent the approval. So I'm just trying to remember that's scheduled to be approved in the future. Just explain that again.
So it's in the forecast, and this is a project that was originally conceived as a public safety project somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 million. And we looked at a town-wide system that would include DPW, Health Department, Board of Ed, and transportation, the bus service. And have looked at whether that, and there's a price tag of over $8 million if we include all of those departments and do the project once. The project didn't go forward because the ECC project was all consuming. So it was stalled for that reason. We were chasing, and particularly the police department, giving a lot of credit for the work that they did to chase grant opportunities. And we are expecting that when we bring the project forward, it will include a federal grant that comes out of the earmark program that was included in the spending bill that was approved 2 weeks ago by Congress. So we will bring it forward. We're waiting for confirmation of the earmark and the amount of the earmark, which I don't have access to. I don't think anybody in the town of Fairfield has a firm grasp on what that number will be. But we will bring the project forward with an offset from the federal government grant.
Okay, so we're going to get some grant money from the feds on that. You just don't know the amount and timing of it yet.
Correct.
So then just remind me on the command vehicles, there's 2 of them. What kind of cars are they? How many miles do they have? Who drives them? Is it the chief, the deputy chiefs who drive those? Tell me a little bit about that.
These 2 vehicles will be staff vehicles. We're going to get small pickup trucks for the fire marshal's office, who are currently driving Crown Victorias. And the reason, the rationale behind a pickup truck is because of the exposure to contaminated gear and equipment that is in a standard Suburban or Ford Explorer. It's in the same atmosphere. And fire inspectors carry equipment with them that would be most suitable to carry in a separate environment. The only way to do that is, or the most economical way to do that, is to have a pickup truck with that separate environment in the, it's not a heated space, but it's a separate atmosphere, so that they're not riding around all day long with contaminated gear or equipment in the back of an Explorer. And the price compared to Explorer and a pickup truck are relatively similar.
So they're driving Crown Vics right now?
Correct.
Something like that?
Yep.
Okay.
These are 2008.
2008. Okay. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mottola. Chief, if I could just quickly follow up on Mr. Mottola's question about the radio equipment. I understand that the larger project is stalled awaiting for a grant, and presumably whatever we don't get a grant for will be bonded. And I'm wondering why, well, 2 questions, I guess. This seems to meet our bonding criteria, so I'm wondering why it's in the capital budget, given that it's effectively part of the larger project. And also, if we pay for this out of the, separately, does it in any way jeopardize grant dollars that we would be eligible for if we had it as part of a larger project?
It won't jeopardize the larger project. The grant is not going to, we will not have 100% of the project covered by grant. So the expense of replacing the radios separately from that are inconsequential to our grant application. The number is just over the threshold for the bonding. It was a decision to put it in the budget and survive in the budget. I'm ambivalent about where the funds come from. I was told by Mr. Walsh many years ago, you tell us what money you need and we'll decide where it comes from. But it is an issue that we need to move forward and have a reliance that this can be purchased on July 1st, so we can get them in service. And I don't want to give short shrift to the loss of radios and the impact on operations. We currently go to the city of Bridgeport, and city of Bridgeport comes here. And we do the same with the town of Westport on a regular basis. Not being able to communicate with our mutual aid partners. They have already migrated. They were anticipating the same radio upgrade that we did, and they pulled the trigger much quicker than the town of Fairfield has. So, we need to solve that problem because it is a health and safety issue for our responders in those environments.
Okay, yeah, understand that. So, and just to circle back, so the grant that we would get is not in any way a percentage of the total spend, and so that whatever grant would be unaffected by carving this small piece out.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. Other questions from the board on this budget?
So, Madam Chairwoman, can I just jump in and say that we wanted to, I know obviously we're all being very cognizant of our bonding capacity and all the massive amount of projects we have and infrastructure issues, obviously. So we thought that when we developed the budget, we looked at everything and we thought we could afford to keep this in the operating budget. Now, yes, the chief is talking about how the police department has applied for a grant through the federal earmark system with the senators. We first tried with the congressman, with Congressman Himes through the House, and then that didn't work. And we went then through the Senate. We're hoping, we believe we're going to be able to get something. We just don't have a firm number on it. And as the chief mentioned, it's a global project, right? It's like $8 million. So some of it is for the public safety pieces, fire and police. And then you would add in the other parts that, obviously we could have discussions about as we move forward with bonding. But if we can get an announcement, and I've been reaching out to Senator Blumenthal's office, if we can get the information before the budget process is over, obviously we could then reduce this amount. But we don't want to jeopardize public safety. So we obviously want to keep that in there because, as the chief explained, we're not soon going to be cut off from being able to communicate. And that's going to put people's lives at risk. So we figured it was important to keep it in.
Yep. Thank you for that, Ms. Kupchak. Appreciate that. Any other questions from the board on this budget?
Madam Chair.
Ms. Marmin, do you have, was your hand up or were you just? No? Okay. Oh, Mr. Testani, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Hey, Chief, how are you tonight? Good to see you. Thanks for coming. Just a quick, I sort of asked Chief Calamaris, this seems to be a little bit of a theme, but on there's one item in particular that went up a little bit and is sort of a little unusual, I guess. to have 15.4, again, not big dollars, I'm just curious. This one in particular is on educational and memberships. Is there more available this year, or I'm just curious about the increase on that line?
Hold on 1 second. Wait, just double check. Oh, yep. In particular, there is the Connecticut Fire Academy increased their fees. They have so when we send recruits to the Fire Academy, there is a charge for tuition and housing that has been remained pretty flat over probably the last 5 or 6 years. And it's just around $6,000. They're projecting increasing that to reflect their actual costs. They've been not increasing in the past. I don't think that there's been a significant increase in 5 or 6 years. We have received word for that from the Fire Academy that they'll be increasing. Ultimately, that cost will be $11,000 per recruit. They're going to phase it in over several years to get back to their actual expense exposure. So that's a big driver there.
That comes in under that line, Chief, is that right?
Yep, correct.
Okay. And just there's a couple of others that I just had a quick question. If you look at item number or line item 56140 under special departmental supplies.
Correct.
I guess I have like 2 questions. One, exactly what is that? And then 2, if you look at your fiscal year 20 actual was 49,541. Your fiscal year 21 actual was 40,652. Your budget is 51,540 when last year's actual was $11,000 less than that. So was last year a COVID? Is that a COVID thing? I just trying to figure out why it was so much less last year.
So what comes out of this budget, special fire department supplies, emergency medical supplies and equipment, there is a significant, you've seen probably news reports about firefighting foam. And
yes, right.
The hazards we have and are participating with the state of Connecticut in a foam collection process that has been funded by the federal government. Replacement of that foam is the responsibility of the local fire department. So that is the largest driver. There are small increases in EMS equipment and supplies, many of which we did not have to buy during the past 2 years. A lot of that equipment was being supplied during COVID from grants and supply distributions from the state of Connecticut. Now it falls back to, so some of the smaller numbers, we weren't buying foam because we wanted to expire any inventory that we had. And we now have to buy EMS equipment and foam. And those are the 2 reasons why you'll see this change that is over previous year's actuals.
Okay, and I guess along the same line under 58120 travel and meetings.
Yep.
Again, last year's actual was 3,744. This year's budget is 8,000. It's actually more than double your fiscal year 20, or close to double your fiscal year 20 actual. So again, is there more meetings available? I just wondered why, it's such a significant increase from previous years.
We didn't send anybody anywhere. There
Last year, right, because of COVID,
travel. Right? All training was local, and there was no in-person training by any member of the department, either in state or out of state.
Okay.
The number that we're requesting is consistent with pre-COVID levels.
Well, I would understand that with the exception of the fact your fiscal year 19 actual is 2,231. Your fiscal year 20 actual, which, perhaps might reflect some COVID issue, is still, close to double what your fiscal year 19 actual was. So again, I'm struggling, not that we're talking about a big dollar amount. I'm just trying to understand why there was such an increase. If in a pre-COVID year, you spent 2,231, you anticipate spending 8,000 this year.
The peaks and valleys in addition to training, when we purchase new equipment, rolling a new fire apparatus, we send 3 members of the department from the maintenance division and a supervisor and a project specialist to the factory to do inspections of the vehicle while it's being in development. There are highs and lows. So in an off year, as you know, we forecast purchase of rolling stock every other year, and depending on when those, and we've seen the manufacturing period and the projected delivery dates be extended from what used to be less than 365 days to now over 400 days. So there are inconsistencies in the demands on this budget as it relates to those projects and training. When we're investing a lot internally and doing local training, it takes the pressure off of the travel account. There is, as we replace employees and promote employees, there is an increasing demand on taking some opportunity to send them to instructors, conferences, and things like that. And we are now at that point where we've had significant turnover and we need to invest in their education.
And get them to more travel. I mean, no, certainly understandable. And the only other question I had on the capital outlay piece, since you talked about grants before, had any of those been investigated as to whether or not they qualify, if there's any grant possibility for any of the capital outlay requests from this particular budget?
So
other than the radio thing you talked about.
So the radio is one, and that's a significant grant if we get it.
Right.
We talked about with Mr. Bremer and the administration about ARPA money for the vehicles, and the goal of ARPA money as it relates to fleet maintenance, fleet replacement, is for to create an EV fleet. We ran that to ground with Ford and other providers, and they are just not there yet. When you think of the power demands on an emergency vehicle with radios and chargers and emergency lights, it's interesting. The EV Ford pickup truck, a great pickup truck. I think it's going to be a huge success. Limited range, 270 miles. The upcharge for a larger battery was $10,000, and it added 70 miles to the projected range. So clearly, this is not a technology that we're ready to embrace, and it needs to be proven, become more economical and longer range and durability for us to approach that. The other point that I want to make about grants is there is one major fire grant program that's available to you, to the town and the fire departments, the Fire Act. We had applied, and as you remember, the Board of Finance approved a budget for a self-contained breathing apparatus.
Yes.
And this year, and we are expecting and hoping that'll be that $320,000 appropriation will be offset by the Fire Act grant. We're only allowed to apply for one per year. We have been very successful in the past, and will continue to apply for those.
How much is that grant, Chief, and when do you expect to hear a decision on it?
So the grant was 160,000.
Right, out of the 320, right? Yeah, I think I seem to
So
remember.
it, you know, there is a approved price point for the self-contained breathing apparatus. The total project is $320,000. We're hoping to get, 90% of it. But that would require, as I talked about during my presentation of that, it requires a rule change. They're only allowing $7,000 per unit. Our costs are over $9,200 per unit. So we're trying to, and other fire departments as well, trying to encourage them to change the top end of their allowable costs so that we can capture close to the full cost of the replacement.
Okay.
Yeah, and that we should hear in the month of May. And we're not making any purchases until the grant application is settled.
Wow, that's great. Keep us updated, would you? And
I will.
again, thank you and the department for all your hard work. I think you all do an amazing job, as I think the same of the police as well. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Madam
I
Chair.
can just say there's an incredible team here of people that, work very, very hard for the mission of the town and the mission of the fire department. And they deserve a lot of credit.
Always reflective of the leadership, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Testani. Okay, and thank you, Chief McCarthy. I'm going to move on, I think, if no one else has questions on this budget. Okay, so let's quickly go to the Regional Fire School. It's on page 236. Given that this is a relatively small budget, we can go straight to Q&A on this one. Does anyone on the board have any questions on this? Okay, looks like no. All right, so then let's turn to 4090 hydrant and water, and that is on page 154 of the budget book. And for this one, let's see, Chief, do you want to just, I'm sure that the board has read the budget message. Maybe you could just give a little more color around the rates that are changing, how they drove the numbers in the budget, and sort of what's pending and when all this will be finalized.
Sure. Madam Chairman, if it's okay with you, I'll defer to Deputy Chief Dunn to give you that explanation.
Absolutely. Welcome, Deputy Chief Dunn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So this is based on, I'm sorry. This is based on the information that we get from Aquarian Water. I asked them for initial information in November on their rate changes, their proposed rate changes, and they give us their final pronouncement in February with a letter to the First Selectwoman's office. What it does is it funds the rental of, we have over 14 million inch feet of water mains in town, and we have 1,578 hydrants. So there's certain PURA approved rates for each of these items, and then PURA approves credits and surcharges. So it's based on that calculation. It's basically like us getting a UI bill or a Southern Connecticut gas bill. We basically just have to budget for it once they charge us their PURA approved rates.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, maybe a little bit of confusion. You mentioned that we got a final determination on rates in February. I'm reading the bullet points here. It sounded like some of the rates were pending approval, and then there was, last bullet says new rate to be effective April 1, but yet to be determined. Was that just at the time the budget book was written, or?
Sorry. No, some of these things are still pending, and what they usually do is they give us their approximation of what what they believe Pura will give them. So, for example, in their small print, they say that the water infrastructure and conservation adjustment is currently 9.78%. The company has filed a petition with Pura, and with a decision expected March 16th, 2022. If approved, the current charge will increase such and such. However, the company anticipates a filing to request a new WICA surcharge of approximately 3.10% that will be effective July 1, 2022. So, it's not as scientific for us, but what we do is we speak to them when we get what they estimate the final outcome will be.
Okay. So even though some of this is pending, it sounds like you're confident that of these estimates based on your discussions. Does anyone on the board have questions on this budget? Okay. All right, we can move on then. So the last one, and thank you for that, Deputy Chief Dunn. So we can move on to 4110. This also, emergency management this one's on page 157. This is also a relatively small budget, 150,000. It's flat with last year. Any board members have questions on this one? Okay, seeing none. All right, Chief, looks like we are done. Thank you very much for being here, for hanging with us as late as you did. Thank you, of course, for everything you do. We appreciate you and your department, and hope you will convey that to all of them. So thank you again.
I'll make sure. And thank you for your time. Good to be with you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right. Okay.
Thanks, Chief.
All right, so we're going to move on to we have just a couple of departments left. If we're lucky, we'll break our streak of going till midnight. So I'd love to do that. So Department 3110, which is IT, that's on page 129. And Dave Kelly, who we all know and love, who takes care of us during all our meetings, is here to walk us through that budget.
Hello.
Mr. Kelly.
So the IT budget is mostly used to cover maintenance contracts and, for software and computer systems that are shared by a majority of departments in town. So if a department has some unique software that only they use, it comes out of their budget. But otherwise, most of the centrally shared, widely used software comes out of the IT budget. It's generally fairly steady. Our budget's not too different than prior years, and many of our lines haven't changed at all. But I'll just go through some of the highlights of some of the lines that have changed. So as you heard from the police chief earlier, we've moved a technology support position from the police department into the IT budget. And we've also moved a technology support position from the library into the IT budget. So that accounts for most of the increase in that payroll and Social Security contributions lines. And obviously those should be reflected as decreases in the other departments' lines. We've also done a department reorganization this year. We've eliminated 2 positions and have created 2 new positions to better fit our needs going forward. And the new positions are, let's say, a higher technology, higher order positions. So there's I think we have a 1 grade higher than the older positions, which accounts for the rest of the increase in that line. IT software and fees and professional services, most of what we see there, it's just my estimations of what the cost increases are going to be from last year to this year. We did have to rip out and replace our antivirus software with a new one that was almost double the price in order to comply with our cyber insurers requirements. So that also accounts for some of the increase in those lines. Maintenance and repair of equipment, we just have some more servers that are running off warranty, so we tend to put them on maintenance. We typically keep computer servers for about 7 years, and the warranty runs for 3, so we do put them on maintenance for the remaining years until we replace them. The communications line is down quite a lot, and that happened through an opportunity that arose when we renewed our town-wide wide area network contract with ChimeNet. I changed the design of the network a bit to right-size some of our network links to the golf courses, which resulted in a substantial cost reduction to the town. And then lastly, in our capital outlay, we have most everything that we have in town IT in terms of general equipment replacement, we do in our annual operating budget. There's just one item that was purchased right before I started with the town. The town's data storage systems, our servers have large, high-performance disk drives that store all of our email and maps and all the other information we have in town. And that was purchased in one big lump in 2016. And the vendor has now announced an end of life on that equipment a couple of years from now. So we're going to have to replace that. And I've noted previously that this board prefers smoother budgeting rather than convulsive large purchases being made from time to time. And it's an item, since it lasts less than 10 years typically, that may not be so suitable for bonding, because we don't want to have buy something with a bond that doesn't last the length of the bond. So what we're suggesting is that rather than try to replace the whole thing, all of it, all at once, that instead we replace it in smaller pieces over time. So I've asked for an additional $75,000 per year in capital outlay to see if we can maintain this more as a maintenance item as we do everything else.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kelly, I think I lost you on that last item. What are you referring to on the actual capital project list with that comment?
The capital project, it would be the last item, town mass storage system.
Oh, the 25,000. Okay, so you're saying you would put
Well, that 25,000 has been changed to 75,000.
That was the Board of Selectmen adjustment.
That's right.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay. All right, that's what I was missing. All right. Thank you for that clarification. Questions from the board on this budget? Ms. Marmion.
Thanks very much. We've heard a lot about the town wanting to go towards hybrid meetings using technology that's out there. I don't know what it is, but and that we're waiting for that to be fully kind of operational. Is that something that your department is involved with? Is there a cost involved in that that is reflected in your budget for this year?
Yes, we're involved with it. You're talking about the Zoom room idea.
Right.
And we have an RFP in with the purchasing department to find a vendor to actually install the equipment in about 8 locations around town, where we would hope to schedule town meetings into one of these 8 locations. And we can have this combination in person or at home participation in the meetings. So we've had kind of I'll call it a bill of materials, or a design presented to us by Zoom, and we're in the process of trying to get it implemented through vendors.
So
it's not in my budget that the Zoom rooms are being funded through the ARPA project. So the implementation, the installation, that was one of the many items that were voted on from the ARPA funds.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just to jump in, Sheila, this is what you guys voted on. I presented it to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and RTM. And this is all covered under the ARPA funds, the hybrid meeting rooms.
Okay, how much was that, Brenda? What, do you remember what the?
400,000.
400,000. So, okay, great.
That's for
So-
all the technology to outfit the rooms. We went through a little bit of a sort of growing period because we were learning about it. And then the Zoom, we were going to go with all Zoom, but then we didn't, Dave came back and said he didn't want us to get locked into just Zoom. So we are using some of their equipment, but we're also hiring an outside vendor so that we can use WebEx, meetings, Zoom, we can use whatever we want or whatever comes in the future. So we're not boxed in to just one kind of application.
Gotcha. Thank you for that.
Sure.
All right, thank you, Ms. Marmion. Other questions on this budget? Mr. Testani?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Hey, Dave, how are you?
Good, how you doing?
Good, good. First question, I out of respect to Ms. Marmion, I won't even go down the trail of the Zoom hybrid meeting rooms, one of my favorite subjects, but the laptops, and I think we may have had a similar conversation to this last year, and you may have answered this before, so I apologize ahead of time. Just wanted to refresh my memory. 18,000 line item 2 for 12 laptops at 1,500 each. Have we talked about combining with the Board of Ed? Are these unique laptops that you need? Is it too difficult to, because obviously I know they buy laptops as well. I just was thinking we might do better if we combine the effort.
There's nothing special about these laptops, although I think the Board of Ed is mostly buying what are called Chromebooks.
Chromebooks, right.
So
Okay.
they're buying a, it's a very low cost, typically $200 device that essentially boots up and runs the Chromium web browser. And for many of the Board of Ed student purposes, right, for many of their student purposes, that's very useful and that's enough. But our town laptops are used to run various department software or to remote in to the town. So it's a different creature altogether.
Right, now I got you. Okay. And I had asked this, probably in the wrong format, to Alex Vishno. And obviously you sort of touched on it a little bit, but out of my own curiosity's sake, since there's such a emphasis on cybersecurity, especially given the invasion from Ukraine and the threats from Russia, have you kind of altered that a little bit in terms of how the town is protected? Are you anticipating more dollars to be spent on cybersecurity prevention? What are your thoughts along those lines?
Generally, I'd love to take this kind of a conversation offline because we
Fine with
just
me.
don't
We can
discuss
talk about it another time in the interest of time tonight. Unless you are going to be too disappointed if we end before midnight, Dave.
No, I'll be terribly heartbroken. We're very much working on defending the town, and doing all that's reasonable to try to protect ourselves. But I don't see a big change in our spending. But I don't. My crystal ball is a little cloudy on that. Last year, when the town was renewing its cyber insurance, actually the carrier that we were using through CCM got out of the business. So the town needed to find another cyber insurance carrier. And each year they come back with more and more requirements and requiring us to do things like choose a different antivirus solution that costs quite a bit more. So I'm not quite sure what this summer is going to look like, but I don't anticipate a significant change. So I haven't budgeted much more than what I've already put in here.
No, okay, and I understand. I just, I've read, as I'm sure others have, of the dire warnings of a potential hack from Russia. So I just thought I would ask.
I'm kind of hoping and believing that we've got very good defenses in place now.
I think we probably do. Yeah.
Any time we can improve them, we do. But be delighted to speak about this offline. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks,
Call
Dave.
me anytime or come by.
I will. Appreciate your hard work as always, and we'll try to not get you too disappointed tonight, Dave. Thank you.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
Right.
thanks.
Well, the clock is racing, so let's see what we can do. Actually, I just want to say I really appreciate Mr. Testani's last question. I think that's an important issue. It may not be a budget issue, given that we've heard from Mr. Kelly that we don't expect an increase in costs, but it's a serious risk management issue, and it might be a topic at some point during an executive session that's that's relevant for us. So thank you for that. Any other questions from the board on this budget? Okay, terrific. All right, so we're almost there. The next, oh, and thank you, Dave, by the way. Thank you for the information and for all that you've done to kind of keep the town moving during this period of COVID and everything that's meant to all of us. So we really appreciate everything you do.
Yep.
All right. So next up on the agenda, we have 2020, which is fund balance, and we don't really need to turn to the page because that is zero, given that we are, the administration has signaled its plan to replenish fund balance out of surplus. And of course, I think the board would, well, that would happen automatically. So unless the board voted otherwise. So we can just open this up. If anyone has any other questions related to fund balance that they want to discuss at this time, I'll open it up for questions. Okay, I saw one or two yawns, and I think we're all good on this topic. All right, so we can move on to debt service, and that is 11030, and it is on page 225 of the budget book. I'm going to I'll turn this over to Jared. The information on 225, Jared, since we don't have a comparative analysis of the components, maybe as you review this, you can kind of speak to them so that, we can understand what's driving the reduction in debt service this year.
Sure, and if it's okay, I'd like to hand it over to Caitlin to do the initial review of this.
All right. Thank you, Caitlin.
Sure. As you guys know, this department, so to speak, is basically, the majority of it is contracted debt service payments for issuances that have already happened. So the biggest driver of the reduction, just to kind of start out as a summary, is the clean water, the principal on the clean water state loan. This is the last year of a 20-year bond for that piece. So I believe last year's principal, or the 22 principal, was about $1.7 million, and it's going down to about $300,000. So that's the main driver of the decrease. But if you look at page 225, we can just kind of go down the different lines. The first line being fees and professional services. These are the cost to market our bonds and bans. That's the majority of it, and other bond counsel costs for Pullman Conley. So we're requesting a slight increase there to $150,000. The rest, the principal piece, the principal and the interest are on our authorizations that have already happened. So the 18 million. There is a $1.5 million use of bond premium, and we can talk about that in a second. I believe Frank has sent out a nice bond premium schedule. It's basically the premium that we've received over the past 3 years from our issuances, that we take a third, and we use it to pay down our debt service on our bonds. That nets out to be a $17 million number. The next section is the interest associated with those same long-term bonds is the 5.8. We estimated interest due, because our first interest payment is due in 6 months. So that will be due January 2023 from this issuance that we're going to do in July. We're estimating that at 337, which comes off the waterfall chart. So that's estimating, I believe, a 30-year $30 million bond going out in July. So that's 337. We won't know until it actually gets issued in July. So the estimated interest due on our bonds is the 6.1 million. The next section has to do with our bands, which are our 1-year notes. The principal pay down on the band is the 543. And the interest, the net interest due is literally, so we issue a band, we get premium for that band, and statutorily we have to use that premium the next year. So the 276 get nets with the 254, which leaves a net interest due of the $22,000 for the band interest. The next piece is the big piece, is where we're seeing all the reductions with the state loan for a clean water fund bond from 20 years ago. So this is our last principal and interest pay down for that loan of 294. So that totals up our debt expense this year for 24,210,000.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. Mr. Curley, question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Caitlin, for walking us through that. It seems fairly straightforward in terms of a lot of this being fairly fixed.
Yes.
There's not much variable. If I understood what you described correctly, I think the only variable to this potential expense is the $337,500 that is described on page 225. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the number that's based on an estimate of interest for bonds that haven't been issued yet, right? So if there's either an increase in the amount of the bonds, or if there's a delay in those bonds, that number may vary, the 337.5, but almost everything else on this page is pretty predictable. Am I correct in that assessment?
Yes, the principal piece is set in stone, the 18,555. The interest of the 5.8 million set in stone. The band pay down is what we've changed our philosophy lately, so that's pretty much set in stone. The interest on the band is totally set in stone, and the principle of the clean water is totally set in stone as well. So there are a couple. The 150, the estimated cost to market is it's been going up lately, so hence the budget increase of I think it's 50,000 from last year. And again, some of this is, so basically what goes in there is our rating agencies, our US Bank, who is our trustee, who we pay all of our debt service to, Phoenix Advisors, who's our financial advisor. There's a small fee for the technology that they use to for the sale of the bond and the actual OSs that are generated, the official statements, and Pullman Conley, who is our bond counsel. So basically, those are the costs that kind of roll into that 150. But yeah, as you said, that 337,500 is an estimate. It's an estimate. We won't know until July, and it's based on our waterfall of issuing, I think it was $30 million at a rate of 2.25%. So of course that could fluctuate as well.
And right, and so if we don't issue a bond for 30 million in July, if we do it later in the year, that this number could come down quite a bit.
Well, we issue once a year, so there will be an issuance in July. It's really, is it going to be exactly 30 million? We're not sure, and what's the rate going to be?
Got it. Okay. So I guess my question is, my follow-up question to that, probably a broader question. There are a lot of things that we've flipped pages on over the last couple of weeks in terms of capital. We talked about a little bit tonight, the fire department and their equipment. Should that be capitalized or not? Should it be in the operating budget? Paving was another item. To the extent that there are changes to that, to the potential list of what's capitalized or what's not, I imagine that also would adjust this number too, right? The 337.5.
So yeah, so basically what happens between now and June, there's I'm not sure if you read about it in Brenda's newsletter, a capital working group.
Yep.
So we're going through now a listing of all the projects that have been, we can only issue bonds for things that have been authorized. Okay, so it's nothing in the future. It basically has to have gone through all three boards by basically June 1st to kind of get it into the process, because we start thinking about the OS and how we're going to structure the bond. So it has to be an authorized project. And what we do is look at the cash flow of these projects, given the supply chain issues of some of these projects, due to no one's fault, the bridges, the design, they just take years for the regulatory bodies to approve. So we go through it, but we're focusing on, you know, a 30 to $37 million number. I think is basically where we're going. And then there's some older authorizations that we need to kind of clean up and figure out if some smaller dollars still need to get authorized as well.
So a little bit of leftover from last year that didn't make it into the system.
Well, there's certain things like the schools, they just take a long time. Mill Hill has been going on for, you know, 3 or 4 years. They're still kind of going through the system. And one of the hardest things to try to estimate is the reimbursements, right? How much is the school going to give us? So there's always you know, we kind of, you know, we know it's between, I talked to the schools, 22%, 23%, but you really don't know for years. So we kind of leave a little bit of space in there for the final audit. The final audits, you know, don't happen for 5 years later. So it's really tricky. So some of these projects looks like they're old and they're lagging, but in reality, that's how long it takes to really close them.
Okay, that's helpful. And just staying on that same topic and list, I don't know if this is a question for Jared, or I don't know if the first select woman's still on the line. I don't see her on the screen, but understanding that this capital working group has been put together and they're going to work on the priorities. It's a finite capacity, so that's all going to happen after we go through our budget process. So I guess we're just going to have kind of a placeholder assumption on interest, and then which projects fit into that will be what they will be. But I guess I continue to get a lot of requests for information or insight as to where the Roger Ludlow Middle School turf project falls on the waterfall. I know it was in the waterfall for a while. I just don't know where it falls in the current priority list. I don't know if anyone has any insight on that tonight.
So, Craig, yes, we put together the working group, and I know this is your first year on the Board of Finance. It's only my second budget season, or maybe it's my third. God, it feels like my 10th, to be honest.
Fair enough.
So much fun. But anyway, so the way it was done in the past, where, you know, there was a capital workshop and lots of projects were discussed and sort of slotted, but there wasn't like a real firm plan. Like it wasn't like, and I'm not discounting anybody's way that they do things, right?
Yeah.
We did have COVID hit. It was a tremendous impact on how everything was done, including running the town. So, you know, Jared came on and he interacted with a lot of other financial CFOs in other towns and our financial people who help us and advise our finance department. They said, you should really have a firm 5-year capital plan. You know, not concrete, but you should have a 5-year capital plan. Because I think the way it was done in the past was there was a capital workshop and all the projects were discussed and department heads came and they talked, they did their 14 points. And then the first select person picked, you know, just sort of randomly whatever projects they want to pick. And as you can see, just when we did ARPA, right? We had Rooster River on that thing for a really long time. We had the bulkhead down at Southport Harbor. That thing was sitting on the Capitol waterfall for like ever. So there wasn't any like continuity, like no one really knew what was going to get picked. And so I just thought, you know, when we did the capital workshop, show all projects. This is everything. This is the kitchen sink. And then let's have a discussion about all those items. And then let's have a smaller working group come together 2 members from each of the town bodies that will actually someday vote on these projects to have a better sense of the financing piece, the bonding piece, all of these things, right? And then work on the 22-23 fiscal year list, and then work over the summer to compile a 4-year summer end all the way hopefully till January, because I know that'll be a little bit more thick because going to really start looking at these projects. I support the turf fields. I met with them. I completely understand it. It hasn't been an issue that I'm aware of before I came in. It wasn't like turf fields has been sitting on like the bulkhead was for 20 years. It's new.
Yeah.
And it's expensive. I mean, it's not cheap. So I've had conversations with Brendan and Dylan and many, and I've had them in for meetings. I'm actually meeting with those guys again tomorrow. Listen, I think it's open for conversation. I think we should have the discussion in our working group, looking at all the different various projects. And I explained to both gentlemen that, we have some real infrastructure issues coming down at us. We have the fill pile, tremendous expense, tremendous. The old town hall, we all joke about it. Oh, mushrooms growing in the carpet. Oh, it's sinking into the ground. It's actually not funny. It needs to be discussed and addressed. So I thought it was important to bring stakeholders together to first talk about our financial bandwidth. Well, how much do we have on our credit card? Let's not put ourselves at risk. Let's have some contingency money. And let's just have these discussions as a group. Obviously, I'm the sole person who can put any item on an agenda before it goes anywhere. But I want collaboration from town bodies. I want people to work together and have some buy-in, for the Board of Finance members to go back and talk about what we said, and the RTM members to share with their caucuses, so you can get some buy-in. I don't want this to turn into a competition where everybody's like, now, oh my God, I want my project, I want my project, because there are projects like Old Town Hall or nobody's going to be calling the Board of Finance members up and saying, make sure you put some money away for that contaminated soil. It's not a sexy item, but we're all elected officials and we've got to figure this stuff out because it's real stuff and we have real things that we're going to need to pay for. So I am supportive of that. And when they first came to me back in June on the turf fields, their pitch was that they would come up with half the money. And I said that to Brendan and both Dylan, that, this is an expensive project. And we're going to have to discuss how we're going to fund it. Is there buy-in from the whole town? Would the whole community say, yeah, do that instead of something, else? So this is up for discussion. And again, putting together that first year, whatever, 22, 23, we're going to have a little bandwidth, maybe a little left, a little room there, but we have to also look at the education, and that's why they're involved. They don't have a whole lot of projects those first couple of years, but then they got some mammoth requests that are going to just cloud out the sky. So we have to look at all this, and we're all responsible here. We all have to make these decisions. We're not doing it in a vacuum. And I'm just trying to have us be sort of cohesive and all understand what's ahead of us, what are our priorities, what are the things that need to get done, and try to just make some good decisions. So I hear you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Brenda. I do. You put a lot out there, so I just want to respond to a couple of things. One, I completely appreciate the idea of putting the wish list out there with the workshop the last time. The only thing that I would respectfully ask is if we can try and go back to a September type timeframe for that, because that happened in January, and then now you're having this working group together, which I also support. I think that's also a great idea, to make sure that you have buy-in. But it feels to me like it's happening late. I would have loved to see all of that happen 3 or 4 months earlier, shifted, so that we had a chance to digest what was going into that capital plan as we evaluated this budget. So I'm hoping next year that timeline kind of works better. In terms of the Board of Ed stuff, you're right. I totally agree. There's a ton of capital spend, not just with the Board of Ed and the HVAC, but the town in general has a lot of capital spend facing us. My fear with this particular project, the turf field at Ludlow, is that it has been on the waterfall for a while, so it's not necessarily a new item. But relative to those other projects, it is relatively small. It's less than $5 million. And if it gets behind this big, massive wave of other capital demands in the next year and the year after and the year after, it's going to feel like it's never going to happen. And I kind of feel like if we have a little bit of capacity this year to get that in, that would go a long way to meeting some of the requests and the demand of making a good faith step to putting the kids and some of these other folks forward, high on the list.
No, and
so
I
appreciate all that you're doing.
I hear you, Craig. And, listen, Anthony's working on that master plan, the recreation plan. I know some of you have participated in those hearings, and it's continuing. Obviously, they're doing a reassessment. Well, they're, recreation in general, but they're doing an assessment of the fields. Are they being utilized in the proper way? Should they be utilized in a different way so that there's more life to them? So there's a whole lot of different things in the air. And I do want to, again, I do want to support this, but again, it's not just, by itself. There's so many other things. And I want to apologize. I wanted to try to get back into normal life after COVID. And have our, capital discussions in September. But as you know, my mother passed away in September, and so that was sort of a gut punch for me, and I was out of the loop a little bit there. But I think I think this may be a good way to do it. Like I've said this before. During some of the meetings over the last couple of years, I worked for Chris Shays for a period of time, and he used to say all the time, we don't do what we always do. And so when new problems come up, he would say, maybe we should look at it a different way. Let's try to look at it a different way. And you would never want to answer him that, I did it this way because that's a way we always did it. And so I'm trying to look at it a little differently and just try to maybe tweak things and maybe do things just a little differently. And maybe it won't work out. I don't know. But hey, listen, I will at least want to try. So I think this will be fruitful, and maybe we can get a turf field stuck into that. I don't really know. I want us to have a discussion and look at these things. So I hope that, Lori's on it. She's been good on it. Jim's on it. We have Mark McDermott and Jeff Steele on it from the RTM. We have the chairwoman and vice chairman of the Board of Ed. We have everybody in the room. And actually, it's been quite enlightening, I think, for the Board of Ed people to see that, there's a significant amount of needs. And so everybody wants something, right? So we have to figure it all out. And I hope, Lori will communicate with your caucus, and Jim is going to communicate, and I want to communicate too. But I'd like to get there too. We've got a lot to look at.
One last question, Brenda. With respect to that working group, to the extent that the public is interested in those discussions and the deliberations of what the town's priorities might be, are those expected to be public meetings and available to the public?
So they're internal meetings, just like, and I know somebody said it during something, maybe one of my Board of Selectmen meetings, saying it should be, I have meetings every single day that relate to the town that are not public meetings.
Yep, understood.
This is an internal meeting. Again, the capital workshops were open meetings where the public would come and speak. But again, at the end of the day, it was the first select person who was choosing what project was going to be picked to put on a list. So there will be plenty of time for residents to weigh in on their projects. I mean, listen, I've only been doing this now for a little bit of time, but I'm pretty dialed into what people want because they call and email me every single day. And so we all are getting feedback, right? but we have a unique situation where we're not the public advocating for one item. We're elected officials who have to look at what is our bonding capacity, what are our liabilities, fill pile, water treatment facility, infrastructure issues, things of that nature. And we have to make some hard decisions. And so, yes, we're going to listen to the public, because at the end of the day, nothing's going to get put on an agenda item unless I put it there.
Interesting. I appreciate the insight. Thank you.
So everyone will fill my little inbox.
I'm all set, Lauren.
Yeah,
I'm
thank
trying
you.
I'm trying to work with those guys, Craig. I am. I honestly, truly am.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Curley. And I want to thank the first select woman also. When she first mentioned the idea of this working group, I really didn't have an idea of how it might work. But after having attended the first meeting, I thought it was absolutely productive. I think it was educational for many of the people that were there in terms of our bonding capacity and the challenges and limitations that the town faces. I communicated that information to my caucus. I'm sure Mr. Walsh did the same. And so the idea is to not just communicate what occurs, but to take input from our fellow elected officials. And in turn, we know we're all taking input from the public. So I think it's going to be a good process. I just did want to address, I actually have a very finite question on debt service, but to Mr. Curley's point on the, or question, I would say, on the interest due on the long-term bonds, I think Ms. Bossi said it was based on $30 million at 2.25%, if I got that right.
Yeah.
And just so everyone's aware, a piece of information from our first capital working group, you know, we are nowhere near authorizing $30 million of capital projects year to date, but and we have more, I'm sure more will come up, but at the moment, the $30 million that could be issued on July 1st would include an assumption that we pay off all of our bans, all of our short-term debt, something we've actually not done because we typically roll a lot of it over. And we then also bond everything that we've authorized. So I just, the only reason I throw that out is if there's a concern with that question that we are, you know, how much capacity do we have, or we might go over. I think at least for this year, there's some flexibility there. I did have a question for Mr. Schmidt, and I think we might have asked this in the questions that we sent out. So I apologize if it was answered and I didn't see the answer, but can you explain the principal pay down number on the bond anticipation notes of $543,000, and specifically, how do we determine that number, and how do we decide what to pay off in terms of bans versus rollover, given that we, you know, frequently roll, you know, this is cheap financing, we roll it over frequently. So how do we come up with that number of $543,000 to actually pay off for next year?
Caitlin, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, some of it, Lori, is so if you roll more than 3 years, you statutorily have to pay, I think it's 1/20th of an amount. And the way that we had been banning all of our short-term, our capital non-recurring projects. We had not been bonding them. There was a change of philosophy. I think it was back in 16 or 17. We said, you know what, a lot of these projects have at least 10, if not a 20-year life. So that we've kind of changed our methodology to bond more of these projects. So some of this dollar amount is those older projects still within that required pay down statutorily from the IRS regs. Because we used to only get that from Pullman Conley. They used to track them all and tell us you have to statutorily pay X number of dollars. It's now been a little bit more incorporated in that huge waterfall chart that has a lot of tabs. So it's pulling in, but some of that is from the older issuances still kind of rolling off. Like you alluded.
Yeah, so if I understand you, now we ban, but if we ban, say, a bunch of capital non-recurring projects, we will, you know, permanently refinance those bans as bonds, let's say the following year or at some point in the future. In the past, to the extent we would continually roll. We still have some old stuff that we that we don't intend to bond, but we intend to just pay off. And this is because otherwise it would go over the 3-year mark. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if you do it over 3, then you have to statutorily have a pay down.
Got it.
And the way that ours were structured, I believe it was a budget decision long time ago. We actually did a 0%, 0%, 5%, 5%, 90%, because I believe it saved probably that first budget year. So we were having spikes with our band pay down number as that big 90% roll off number flowed into our debt service org. So we tried to smooth it out at one point, just say, let's do, you know, a 20% over the 5 years. But now we're really not banning more than 3 years. So that should go down to 0 eventually.
And we're banning essentially to smooth out we're banning to smooth out differences between, you know, what we might authorize during a year versus what is optimal to bond during a year. Is that?
Yeah, we had used that as a leveling, a smoothing. So saying, oh, the waterfall had, you know, 28 million or so. So we were kind of using that as a gauge and then using our bands to kind of even out where we were. Now, our capital non-recurring, as you're aware, we're actually approving 10-year, 15-year, and 20-year bond resolutions. So we're structuring our debt such that those projects are fully paid down within 10 years. So our useful life is matching the principal of that bond. Even though the bond is a 20-year bond, we're making sure that those projects in the structuring only go out 10 years.
Okay, well, that's helpful. Thank you. That was really the only question because I couldn't understand where that number came from. And then
Frank sent out, I'm sorry, I think Frank sent out that premium number so you can kind of see the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3.
I did see that, and it seems like, so the premium rolls in as a credit to debt service in the budget, and that the amount that's rolling in this year is substantially higher than last year. It's almost $600,000 higher, and it looks like that's because we actually had a higher premium on our most recently issued bonds for whatever market reasons, and that's kind of rolling in and benefiting us next year. So that's sort of a temporary, you know, benefit, if you will. It's not that we bonded more, we just had the premium on that last issuance was higher. So we're getting a little pickup from that as a credit for debt service. But, you know, it just strikes me as I look at the comparison, you can definitely have some volatility in these numbers. You know, we think we're kind of issuing these bonds on even amounts, but with all these factors, you know, can definitely swing. So this year we, you know, we have some good news in there, but important to watch it going forward. I don't have any more questions. Does any other board members have questions on the debt service budget? Okay. I did not forget about public comment. We just didn't have anyone pop up in the chat room. So.
Paul had a question.
I have a question.
God had a question.
Believe it or not, I have a question.
John, oh, how could I forget? All right.
Real quick. The fees and professional services line, Caitlin, I think you said that. Does that mostly account for our bond counsel, or are there other things embedded in that?
So bond counsel is a large chunk of it. The rating agencies fluctuate between, Moody's was like 40, Fitch was like 30. So those are big chunks of it. So what I do is I allocate out our bond costs to capital projects, but the general fund takes the bond cost for capital non-recurring, because when there's an authorization for a capital non-recurring project, no one's factoring in bond issuance costs. But the larger the capital projects over $1 million, I do allocate out a percentage of their piece of, if I issue $30 million, I take a percentage. If 10 million is Mill Hill, then I'll charge them 1/3 of the cost, and I do charge the projects for their piece of it.
Do we bid out on a, you know, 3 or 4 year basis our contract with bond counsel, or is that just a decision made by the town attorney who to use? How does that work?
I don't believe that we have. I think it was considered a professional service in our prior purchasing policy. I think there was talk of looking at all of these types of services, like we just did our auditing service. So that could be potentially something that, you know, is looked at.
All right, just curious. Thank you.
So, sorry, now I have a follow-up on Mr. Matola's question, but from what you said, Ms. Bazzi, so the 100 to 150, the 150,000 for next year, that's just a piece of the number, because all the costs to market bonds and bans related to larger projects are allocated to those projects. So what's the gross cost actually of all this financing? I mean, roughly.
So I just looked at, I allocated out in this year, because the issuance happened in this year, I allocated out $85,000.
Oh, okay. So it's not multiples of this or anything like that.
No, no.
Okay.
No.
Okay, so 85,000 would be picked up as part of the cost of a large capital project, and then the general fund would get this piece associated with the capital non-recurring, which is the projects under $1 million.
Yeah,
And then
and also the Pullman Conley, the bond counsel, not related to the issuance, also stays here as well.
And then the fee structures, the attorney's fees, are those just hourly fees, or how do the fee structures work for this?
For Pullman Conley, it's hourly.
It's hourly, and then other fees are they based on
contracted? Our Phoenix Advisors is a contracted number. He's
Okay.
not hourly.
All right, and there's nothing that's related to the size of the bond issuance, is there?
No, no.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, we did a little bit better tonight. It's 11:11, so I would be happy to take a motion to adjourn. Mr. Testani, seconded by Mr. Matola. All in favor? Aye, all right, thank you so much. Good night, everyone.